I feel like you was cut him off.
I thought it was going to come off.
I think it's work that out. That area off one of them.
Oh my God, that's what I
I watched this 420.
I was hoping they were like pull the plug on. Hey, Arthur, if you don't answer the question.
Okay, can I have everyone's attention, please? I want to welcome everyone to the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee meeting. My name is Bob Dorr, and I am the chairman of this committee. And I'd like to introduce the other committee members. James Streeter is the vice chair. Gil Allensworth, David Hoyle, Clint Nagel, George Snyder, and Mary Weber are the other committee participants. I would like to encourage participation in this meeting, and anyone who's in the audience today is invited to sit up here, although we don't have many seats left, I notice. But you're certainly welcome to participate, everyone that's here. Everyone should speak loudly, and we have a microphone here that is picking up your voices. And then we also, I'm going to ask, is there anyone who's remote who's attending the meeting? Okay, we don't have that. I would like to ask everyone to introduce themselves that's here at the meeting today. So I'm going to start with the top of the table, and then we can run through quickly. We do have a lot of people. We have a busy agenda, but we are asking people to introduce themselves. So,
James Tanner, CAPS 14.
Eleanor Prater, CAP support. Tina Watson, CAP administrator.
Police Kirko, DOE.
Clint Bangle, CAP.
Gil Allensworth, CAB.
Bob Dorr, CAB.
Mary Weber, CAB.
Harold Steinman, CAB.
George Snyder, CAB.
Nina Spinelli, CAP.
David Hoyle, CAB.
Rich Olson, DOE.
John Lopez, DOE. Sharon Juicy, DOE. Back to the left.
Mike Johnson, Systems Producer, Technology.
Thank you. Tony Pope, Department of Energy.
Jim Ridley, DOE. Peter Dennis, DOE.
Brenda McBride, Support Service Contractor to DOE.
Maxine Maxted, DOE.
Alan Gunner, DOE.
Michael McElhenney, DOE.
Dan Ferguson, DOE.
Kristen Huber, SRS.
Tom Commit, SRS.
Thank you.
DOE.
Sandy Hall, DOE. Taylor Stowe, SCD head.
Shane Schultz, DDA.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it hasn't come in yet, so I'd like to just keep things moving along because we do have a busy agenda tonight. We will, I do want to remind everyone that there's a public sign-in sheet. If you haven't already signed in, please do. And then also with the CAB members, we do have a CAB sign-in sheet, which I've brought up to this table here. If you haven't already signed in, please do. We have two presentations tonight and our continuing point of contact status update. And then we will have a committee discussion followed by a public comment, and our goal is to adjourn by 6:20. So at this time, I'd like to start with the point of contact status update, and that's going to be presented to us by Rich Olson. And then I would ask that no questions are withheld on this. It's based on a recommendation that we get this status update. So Rich, go ahead, please.
Okay, I just have two areas of updates for our committee. One is the area of budgets, and the other one is military activity. In terms of budgets, as you know, we work in parallel, two different years of budgeting at the same time. In terms of FY 2016 budget, we are waiting for the continuing resolution decision from Congress, and I think you've all heard about that, where that's going. And the deadline was December 11th. It seems like now they're going to extend that a week in terms of until they make their decision. So we're still waiting on that. That decision from Congress on that obviously will impact our funding levels for 2016. In terms of the 2017 budget, DOE prepared the 2017 budget request and sent it to headquarters in September. The Office of Management and Budget, which is OMB, has reviewed that budget and provided their pass back, that's their comments back to DOE. And DOE, at a headquarters standpoint, is now in process of appealing the OMB pass back recommendation. So this is part of the cycle of the budget, and it's out of our hands. It's up in headquarters in terms of the Office of Management and Budget and DOE working to finalize that budget outcome. And as a result of that, that'll lock in maybe our 2017 budget. In terms of military activity, again, that's related to this committee here. There's several military training exercises are planned over the next several months here at the site. These exercises involve light infantry units, aviation, and the group that's called CBRNE, which is chemical, biological, radiation, and nuclear explosives, and engineering groups. They will all be conducting various training exercises here at the site over this next several months. In addition to that, from the military's perspective, like last year, SRS is working with the South Carolina National Guard engineers, and we're identifying a project for them to do utilizing our site facilities for their project. They're narrowed down what type project they're going to do for the site over the next several months, and that we'll have a decision hopefully in January for another project. As you recall, last year the National Guard, through funding of their own, they removed a failing fire pond dam. They improved the water runoff outfalls and cleared debris caused on the site for the 2014 ice storm. So we're continuing our relationship not only with the National Guard for them to utilize our site for real activities to which the site benefits and as well as they benefit from, as well as the military utilizing the site for some exercises for their own benefits there. So that's sort of like an update of activities from the site. You'll hear a little bit more about budgeting in terms of the exercise based on the presentation today on the IPLs, but this is just ongoing where we stand on the budgets. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Our first presentation for this evening is the IPL Integrated Priority List presentation. That'll be presented by John Lopez. So thank you, John.
Okay, good afternoon. John Lopez, the Director of Integration and Planning from DOE. Good to see you guys all again. I was here a few weeks ago doing the budget update for 16. And now tonight I want to go through the process that we go through for the development of our IPL. As you guys heard, you've got a lot of DOE folks here in the audience. This is basically our IPL team. Every year when we get our targets, this team comes together and puts together the fiscal year. We're getting ready to did the 17, getting ready to do the 18 budget here in this spring, and that's why we're here to solicit your input. But we have all of our DOE technical managers here that represent all the PBSs on site, and we also have a couple program analysts that work for me who are actually input the information into the system to generate the IPL that goes up to headquarters. So, but I'd like for this meeting to be an interactive type meeting, not just a presentation, but we're here to answer your questions and educate you on the IPL. If you have any specific questions on specific priorities within the PBSs, that's where I'm going to pull upon our technical folks back here to help with that process. But, so today we're here to understand how the process we go through putting together the IPL. We're here to request your input. Every year we come to you guys and request your input on what your priorities are for the fiscal year 18 budget. And also, we're here to fulfill a commitment for doing the legacy and the work plan for this committee itself. All right. Also, we as DOE are required for the principal deputy secretary to come to the CAB, to come to our stakeholders and ask for your input to the integrated priority list. So, so this is the start of that process. To come to you guys and ask for your input, but we want to give you a little education on how we go about doing that before, to give you a better understanding on how we put it together, and then you can hopefully give us some good input back on developing the agency. As I talked before in my other meetings, we get our money here at the site in buckets, okay? When we get our targets for 18, we'll get a site total, but then we're also given a target for each one of these PBSs that we're required to build our budgets to. So, so each one of the programs will be given a target. They'll sit down and start and identify what that target is, and then start identifying the work scope that they're going to be able to do within that target. The categories, as you'll see in one of the handouts, each PBS is broken up into 3 main categories. We've got MinSafe operations activities, which is the first thing that's funded. We've got regulatory milestone and commitments that we fund, and then then any money that's left over, we have a discretion at the site to use to make progress. So I want you to take a little note here. For fiscal year 16, the MinSafe and support activities for fiscal year 16, that's 65% of our budget goes to the MinSafe activities. So of the fiscal year 16, our budget was $1.3 billion. 65% of that is going to the MinSafe and Essential Site Services activities. 34% goes toward cleanup activities to meet regulatory milestones. So that's right now at PBS 30, that's DASH. We're doing work on remediating the DASH, which has regulatory milestones. There's also a lot of groundwater pump and treat operations that are going on that are to meet regulatory milestones. We also have some regulatory milestones as far as in PBS 13 for the amount of time that we're allowed to keep waste here on site, like for RCRA waste that's generated. I think we have, once it's generated, we have 1 year to dispose of that. So it's meeting those activities. Then our other big PBS that has regulatory milestones is PBS 14, which is the liquid waste. So we fund the MinSafe, we fund the cleanup activities, which is 35%. And then the only other money that's available out of this $1.3 billion budget is 1%, okay, for making progress. And we can use that for, doing processing in the canyons, receiving fuel for spent fuel. We can do it for infrastructure upgrades. And as you know, like in PBS 30, there's not a whole lot of money left by the time, with only 1%, we're tearing down buildings on site. So really the only remediation project, active remediation project we have going on is the DASH project. All the work in PBS 14 is considered regulatory, so none of the dollars in PBS 14 are considered mission activities. It's all considered either MinSafe or meeting regulatory milestones. Questions on that? I can give you the dollars for that too. So of the 65% for MinSafe, about $870 million of that is for MinSafe. Regulatory is about $458 million, and making progress is about $9 million. So of a $1.3 billion budget, only $9 million is in this discretionary account here where the site has discretion on what we can, actually do with that work. Here's some definitions of each one of those categories. The MinSafe activities necessary to maintain facilities in a state of operational readiness. That includes safeguard security. Safeguard security is about $128, $130 million a year. That's all considered MinSafe for the site. There's no regulatory work in safeguard and security. There's no making progress work. It's all considered MinSafe.
I didn't hear the dollar.
Cleanup activities, like I said earlier, these are our funding that's spent meeting our circle commitments, our regular commitments, and any milestones that we negotiated as part of our federal facilities agreement. And then these are primarily 3 PBSs. We got PBS 13, PBS 14, liquid waste, and soil and remediation. So you see PBSs 11 and 12, which are 2 of our biggest PBSs. If you combine the 2, they have no regulatory their cleanup activities associated with them. Then the last category is making progress, and this is where we pull in PBSs 11 and 12, PBS 30 for actually doing cleanup work and meeting our commitments for processing the nuclear waste or nuclear material. Here's a picture of each one of the PBSs, and this shows like PBS 11 and 12 only have MinSafe and making progress. They have no regulatory commitments. PBS 13 has all 3 of the categories. 14 has MinSafe, and all of the work that we're doing at 14 is all toward meeting regulatory commitments. So, yeah, are we making progress? We are, but it's all done to meet our regulatory commitments that we've signed up for PBS 14. PBS 30 has 3 categories: MinSafe, the regulatory, and then making progress. And like I said earlier, PBS 20 and PBS 100, all the work, all the scope in those PBSs are considered MinSafe. So what I'd like to do is each of you have been given a copy of our fiscal year 17 and 16 and 17 IPLs. As you can see, it's broken out by PBS, and then we grouped it by category that shows all the MinSafe activities, the regulatory activities, and the making progress activities for each PBS.
Yeah, that's really
Everybody have a copy of that?
comprehensive.
Need a copy? Tina, do you have an extra copy? All right.
No, I didn't put them on the back table. They were just for around the table. Okay. They're not on the back table now.
Here, I've got a copy.
Yeah.
I can give them my copy if you need an extra copy.
I can take one of them. Okay.
All right. So hopefully you guys have had a chance to review these documents before the meeting. What I'd like to do is to open up the discussion to the room here, to the committee members, to give you guys an opportunity to ask me or our technical folks or our budget folks any questions you have regarding the IPLs. Hopefully we'll be able to answer all your questions, and as an end result of this, after you guys continue to meet, you'll be able to give us your recommendations for priorities by April 30th of next year, which is when we have your input to be able to develop our fiscal year 18 budget submittal. So I have. So questions, discussions?
Yeah. John, I know this is Bob Dorcab. The information you're providing us today is an acceleration of disclosure of the IPL that when we were asked to make decisions in 2015, we didn't have this information this early in the process. So this is I consider this very proactive on Department of Energy's part, and you're giving us quite a bit of information to look at, and the way you've categorized this into minimum safe, make progress, and then, cleanup activities that meet regulatory milestones. I think that helps to understand, all the categories of, how you spend your money within these PBSs.
And we don't make up those categories are what's given to us. When headquarters gives us our budget guidance, we're required to group our activities into those three categories.
Okay.
So, and they pull those together for all of the DOE sites. And we do have regulatory commitments that do fall below our target line. So we do identify that whenever we're submitting our IPL. We do identify if there's regulatory milestones that we don't have sufficient budget we'll pull for. It is identified when we submit our budget up to headquarters. Yes.
I had a quick question on PBS 13, the bottom one, under infrastructure. What is operational support? It's on FY 2016 on the third page.
Okay, thank you.
It's PBS 13 infrastructure. I think it's the only one that says operational support.
Yeah, that probably should say making progress.
Okay.
Right, Brandon?
Yeah.
Okay. Hard to get good help nowadays.
Ouch.
Port service contractor, we can talk to him like that.
There you go.
The PBS 13 has all the general infrastructure for the site. So if H Canyon needs an infrastructure project, that would be included as part of the H Canyon PBS. PBS 13 pays for all the general infrastructure for the site. So if we need to pave a road going into the site that all the PBS use, then that comes out of PBS 13.
When you were talking, hey, John, Gil Allensworth, Cap, you're talking about support minimum safe operations of essential site service on page 6. You mentioned a number. What was that? A dollar figure?
For fiscal year 16, of our $1.3 billion budget, that's about $870 million.
Okay. And just for the PBS 20?
PBS 20 is $128 million.
Okay. With that, I'm just, in light of what's going on in the world, how much are we, is cybersecurity becoming a much heavier burden?
It is. We've got actually 2 new requirements that just come down to the site to beef up our cybersecurity requirements. And we're in the process right now of trying to figure out how we're going to pay for that. Of course, these new mandates come down with no additional money associated with them. So there is no direct PBS for cybersecurity. So what happens is we got to go to each one of the other PBSs and take a little bit of money from each one of those and NNSA to help pay for these new requirements.
Is that a, I don't know how to ask the question. Is that a focus of budget request?
That a focus of
cybersecurity specifically to up the ante on that?
Yes.
Specifically being requested?
Yes. Yes. Actually, in 17, I believe there is the DOE is asking Congress for additional money for cybersecurity, but we've got some additional requirements that are hitting us this year that there is no additional money for. But in 17, DOE is asking Congress for additional money for cybersecurity.
Thank you.
These lists that you've provided us provide a breakdown of the elements within each PBS, which is useful information. But isn't it correct that your integrated priority list basically takes each of these elements, puts them into a list, and, for example, some 11C items might be higher on that list than some 13 items and vice versa?
Really, because our targets come down to us at the PBS level, not really at the site level, our priorities are really by PBS and not for the site. Now, we do attempt to prioritize our PBSs when we're doing our IPL, But since our targets come down to us at the PBS level, we really just do the priorities within the PBS, because we as a site don't have flexibility to move money and run from one PBS to another. If we did, we would do that. We would have a site-wide IPL where we could move money around between the PBSs. But since we get our targets at the PBS level, the priorities are really within each PBS.
So can you tell us where the target falls for each of these PBSs?
For 16, I can, yes.
Where do they fall?
You want to know the number? For that, everything on that list is within target.
Oh, so we don't see anything that's not within target.
That's correct.
How come?
That's actually the reprogramming. You got some of the stuff on 11-12 that you're showing if we're successful with the realignment and the spending bill with the reprogramming, that would be the scope buyback.
Okay, so for PBSs 11 and 12, we've included the over target stuff in their accounts. Okay, so for two of the PBSs, we have included some over target amounts in there because we're moving money from PBS 14 into PBSs 11 and 12. So for those, there are. So, but the other ones, for the over target stuff, we just didn't include that. So, I mean, that's probably something we can give you, but I'm not sure how much value added there is to it.
Well, I think it would be interesting because frankly, if there's something that falls below the target line that perhaps the CAB feels strongly about, that might be something that we would give you advice on in our prioritization recommendation.
Okay. All right, we can provide that to you.
Also, it shows for both FY16 and 17 under PBS 100 that the category for PBS 100 is MinSafe. It doesn't make much sense when you read the FY17 guidance that says that things like community and regulatory support are not to be included in MinSafe.
That's the name of the PBS, okay? Now, payment in lieu of, the majority of the PBS 100 is payment in lieu of taxes, okay? That's something that we have to pay, okay, to the communities. I believe about $8 million of the $11 million is payment in lieu of taxes. So, I think it's probably put in that category because there is no other category to put it in. It's not regulatory. It's not making progress. So if that's what the guidance says, I don't know. Sandy, do you know if, so I don't know. If that's what the guidance says, maybe we'll have to recategorize it. But
it specifically says, including payments in lieu of taxes are not to be considered.
Okay. All right. Then we may have that. We may have to recategorize that. So we'll probably have to put it as part of making progress. That's the only other category you can put it in, right, Brandon? It's not regulatory.
Well, you get a subcategory of operational support. I mean, the MinSafe aspect of community and regulatory, it's just that we don't lose track of it. And then we do account for the field we pay for, account for the room grant stuff, and then the other piece of it is the small piece for the CAF. So it's just really in the actual budget system itself, we categorize it as operational support for that very fact, but for chunking this up is kind of a quasi-MinSafe essential site service function is really what, that bucket here in the presentation.
So when we put it into the actual system, do we actually call it MinSafe or is it called operational support?
You're not allowed to call it MinSafe.
Okay. All right. So for here, you're right. So that's probably miscategorized on this list is MinSafe.
But he was throwing that category operational support around again, and that's not one of the categories. So I'm getting a little confused. Is operational support a category or is it not?
It's a subcategory. When we break this stuff out, we get drivers such as MinSafe, 12088 compliance, enabling compliance, other type catch-alls, and then there's a subset of that that's operational support infrastructure, program mission work, I think.
Brandon, is it a subset of one of these three, or should there be a fourth category called operational support?
I mean, we could we could chunk this together in a fourth category and throw all the operational support in there if it would make it easier.
So, but when you actually entered it in the iPad, it's called operational support.
Yes.
All right, so we probably should have a fourth category here then called operational support.
Thank you.
Other questions? Gil?
Yeah. I see that pension and post-retirement benefits is going across many PBS. Forecasting out, how much are they gonna grow larger and larger and larger?
Yes. It's gonna go up, but I'll tell you, it's in fiscal year 16, pension and post-retirement benefits are about 131 million. Okay? 17.
More than secured.
Oh, yeah. 17, it's going up to $186 million.
Do you expect that kind of growth year in, year out?
Yeah. Unless Congress does something that gives us pension relief as they did in 14, 15, 16, it's going to continue. I think we max out in what 2022 at $230 million. Then it starts going back down.
80% funded, we have to be maintained.
What did you say, it was for 16?
16,
100% funded.
it's $131 million. Now remember, we share that with NNSA. So EM's share of that pension is about $85 million.
And do those percentages work out across the timeline?
Yes, pretty much, yeah. It's all based on how much funding we're projected to get and how much NNSA, so there's not much flexibility between, or fluctuation between what we're gonna get in the out years. So then in 17, we're $186 million, and EM's share of that's about $121 million.
And there is, I mean, just for there's no talk about cutting pension.
No, absolutely not. We're required by law to maintain the pension at a certain level.
Good.
And we have an actuary that interprets the law and gives us projections based on life expectancy, how many people are in it, expected payouts, rates, and they give us the projected pension amounts all the way out to the end.
Thanks.
John, Bob Dorcab, just talking about the pensions again, you mentioned there's a year where you reach like a 100%
Yes.
fully funded, and then it starts trending back down again?
It does.
What year was that again?
22.
22, fiscal year 22.
Unless
2022.
they push it out, like you said, if they give pension relief, that curve and that
They'll push
pushes
it out.
out.
We're hoping that Congress gives us some relief on the pension as they have in the previous years. And
They can call
we
it.
kind of piggyback off of corporations. They lobby Congress to, give them pension relief. And so when Congress passes the law to give pension relief, then that applies to us as well. Now, it's interesting to note, I think I've talked about this before, we're the only DOE site that is in this predicament of having to pay. Every DOE site has pensions, okay? But ours is not funded at a level at these other DOE sites. So everybody, Hanford's are the other big site. I think their pension cost is $10 to $20 million a year, and it's constant because their pension fund is funded at the correct level. Ours is not, and which is why ours goes up quite a bit. And that's very difficult for us. Headquarters likes to forget that when they're putting together the budget. So you like to say, oh, well, we're giving you the same thing this year as we gave you last year. Okay, that's true, but our pension costs are going up, and we're able to do less work.
We borrow from our retirees.
Or you could say the retirees, it's an underfunded pension plan.
Semantics,
Yeah. Sure.
It's still very discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
The pension plan is locked now. There is no new, new employees are not going into the pension plan. So
Right.
it's kind of the trend across the industry right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's by 2022. That's how you
Right.
David?
Can you tell me what the, dollar values are for the other elements in PBS 100, 2016?
I don't have those here. I know payment in lieu of taxes is about $8 million. I don't know, Brandon, do you know those off the top of your head, or Sandy?
Ballpark in the green grant piece of that, a little bit over $1 million, and the CAD increments a couple $100,000. Another little piece of DOE leases, maybe $200,000-300,000.
Emergency management, do you remember what that was?
Not as much as
And the CAB?
Cab, I don't know, Jim, what's your budget, what was your budget last year? 345, okay, so it's comparable probably this year, except a little escalation added onto it.
PBS 20.
Yes, ma'am.
Mary Weber Cab, I'm just seeing these things for the first time, so I apologize if I'm asking a question that might sound dumb. But I'm looking at these, the 2016 and the 2017 side by side, and I'm just trying to compare them. And what was the introduction of 235F risk reduction, spent nuclear fuel processing, and infrastructure projects that I'm not seeing on 2016? So, and it's showing as making progress for the 2017, but it's not on the list at all for 2016. So can you just explain that to me? Is that a new item? Are those new items?
Higher level, wasn't it a higher level more rolled up last year?
I'll let Alan address that. Alan,
Let me make sure, repeat your question one more time, I'll try to.
Well, it wasn't very artfully worded, but I'm just trying to put the 2016 and the 2017 IPL side by side, and I'm seeing that there are 3 new items on 2017 that weren't on 2016. And I just wondered if you could explain them or what they were, because comparing them side by side, they look like new items.
All right.
Here.
235, this is Alan Gunner, DOE. The 235F risk reduction, the reason it is not showing up on a 2016 IPL is that 2016 IPL was developed at the president's budget without the reprogramming. So there was no funding available in 16 unless we get the reprogramming to do 235F risk reduction, which is where we are removing PU-238 contamination from 235F.
I think
Spent fuel processing, the reason it is not on the 2016 list is that there was no funds allocated in the budget in 2016 to process fuel. We are using Canadian funds to fund the facility operations as we receive their solutions and process their material. Spent fuel processing would go with that. In 17, though, we do not have a commitment from the Canadians to continue to fund, so we had to put the money into the 2017 budget. Infrastructure projects, there are no infrastructure projects whatsoever in 2016. There was no money available. We are hoping that we will keep some money in the 2017 budget to fund some infrastructure projects within the 11C program. And then the other one.
I think it was just those 3.
Yeah, those 3. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So these are new.
Well, the spent fuel processing, we're doing it. We're just using a different source of funds, which is the Canadian funds that we have a contract.
Our integrated priority
Reduction, we have been planning to do risk reduction, assuming we get the realignment, reprogramming. We will then fund it in 16, but when we put that IPL together, it was based on what the president submitted to Congress, and it did not have any money in there for risk reduction activities. And then the infrastructure is the same way. We've identified infrastructure for the last 5 or 6 years. There was just no funding available, so that's why it's not on the IPL.
Okay. Thank you.
Why is spent fuel processing in 11C instead of 12?
Because PBS, spent fuel processing is H Canyon operations. That is PBS 11C.
I thought 12 was spent.
12 is spent fuel receipts and storage.
Oh.
Actual processing of spent fuel is, in PBS 11C. In 17, we are combining 11C and 12 together because they are interrelated. So there will, in 17, there's really one PBS for nuclear materials, which includes KLNH.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's important to note that the IPL only includes EM funds. As Alan mentioned, you know, we've got Canadian funds for, spent fuel processing. That is not on the, EM IPL. This is EM's budget. This is what we're requesting, but we do have external sources of funds that we use to actually do work on site. Any other questions?
So the Canadian food processing is EM work, it's just not EM funded.
That's correct. That's correct. Anything else? Well, thank you for your comments, and we will get you the over target items that are on the IPL. We'll get those to you, and we look forward to getting your recommendation for the fiscal year 18 budget.
Thanks. Thank you, John. Okay, this is Bob Dorcab again. Next on our agenda is the Environmental Management Performance Metrics fiscal year 2015 targets. And that's going to be presented again by Rich Olson from DOE.
Thank you again, Rich Olson, the DOE Integration and Planning Organization. This is a presentation that some of you older CAB members here have seen before, because we've been providing this presentation for at least the last 4 or 5 years. And it's really giving you a status of where we are in terms of cleaning up the site. And the purpose is really to fulfill the committee work plan, which that provides asks for a periodical update for the environmental management for performance updates. And what we're going to do today is review the actual performance of our metrics and results for FY15. As you recall, FY15 is October to October, and so that year is now complete. And so we're going to go over the results of FY15. And there's another note on here, because we do at times share what the targets are for FY16, but we are not going to be doing that because, like I indicated before, we're still waiting for the FY16 budget to be finalized. So therefore, our targets have to be adjusted, you know, and operationalized based on the amount of budget that we have to do it. So that will be shared with you in the future when we have our financial funding finalized. Just a little bit of background, and first of all, the EM cleanup program here at SRS started in the 1990s. I think you've seen previous presentations when Doug Hempsey was here, the life cycle plan. What is our projection for cleaning up the site? And that's based on the current level of funding, and we extrapolated that out to the future, and it looks like it'll take us to about 2065 to totally clean up the site, and that's our sort of plan of record. I want to mention one thing here, because you'll see a little bit of difference in some of the slides from in the past years. At this, when we go through the particular metrics, we've provided you the current year against target. We also provided the end state target and what % of the end state we are and what year we're going to provide what that we project that will complete that particular metric. This year, there's another organization at headquarters that reviews all presentations that go to the CAB, and that's this year, it's the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, reviewed the presentation, and they asked us not to show those future projections on the slides. I can talk to them, but they would rather not have them on the slides, because there's a perception that those are locked in and we have funding to go do those, and they're saying, no, those are just projections. So you'll see here, those columns that we had in the past are no longer on the slides. And if you have a question on them, I can provide you that information, but they, for whatever reason, they do not want us to have this on the slides to be published, I guess. So with that information, we'll proceed with this. But again, for FY15, you'll see the target and the results for that. The performance measures are really our indicators of how we're doing against the cleanup project here, mission at the site. And just again to recall, when we talk about cleanup of the site, 4 major areas of cleanup of the site: the radioactive liquid waste cleanup, solid waste, nuclear materials, soil, water, and facilities. Those are the 4 major categories of cleanup. Liquid waste area, we have the insoluble waste, which is referred to as the sludge in the tanks. All this really relates to the tanks moving out of the sludge, the soluble waste, which is the salt, and then the actual closure of the tanks themselves. Solid waste is 2 major areas there: transuranic waste, and then mixed and low-level waste. Nuclear materials, you have the nuclear materials disposition, and which Alan was alluding to before. You also have the spent nuclear fuel receipt storage, and then the ultimate disposition of the spent fuel as well. On soil, water, and facilities, you have what we call metrics area around the waste site remediation. We've divided the site up into geographical areas, basically, and then we're you'll see in the metrics 515 geographical areas, which we are then identifying to be remediated, and we measure ourselves against those 515 waste sites. And then also the facilities on the site. The facility is primarily a building, basically on site, and there's over 1,000 facilities on the site. And when we're all done cleaning up the site, all of those facilities are to be deactivated and decommissioned as well. So that's the big scope of what cleanup is when we talk about cleanup for the site. Okay, how did we do in FY 2015 against the metrics in the site? And again, we have roughly, I think you'll see about 10 or so key metrics which kind of give you the major cleanup activities of the site. Our answer to the question of how we did, it's continued progress, but with challenges. We had some significant challenges last year, which I'll kind of go through, which did impact our achieving performance in terms of our targeted metrics. So let's go through the challenges first, and then we'll go over in terms of what we were able to accomplish despite these challenges. One you're all familiar with, well, I think you're familiar with all of these, but the one is the temporary closing of the WIP, the waste isolation pilot plant. That's where we ship all of our transuranic waste or true waste. That site has been closed because of the incidents there. So we have not been able to this year ship any true waste to WIP. So that's impacting that segment of cleanup. You've heard presentations on each of these, and I'm not going to go through the details there other than indicate today these instances here have impacted our performance. The higher than expected levels of mercury in the liquid waste, that had to temporarily, we had to stop operations in solid waste facilities to address that. So that indicated in our targeted performance in this area has been impacted. The anti-foam issue in DWPF, That also, as a result of analyzing that and stopping operations, impacted the actual production of canisters, and you'll see what the impact of that will be. And lastly is in the HB line agitator event, as well as the operational pause, has impacted some of the performance metrics in nuclear materials. Okay, so that was the challenges. This is a highlight of what we did accomplish, and despite those challenges there. We did vitrify or produce 93 canisters from liquid waste this year, and I'll show you later, you know, what the target was in terms of what we accomplished. We did complete the operational closure of one of the liquid waste tanks, tank 16, was accomplished this year. In terms of spent nuclear fuel, we continued the dissolution of foreign domestic research reactor fuel for uranium recovery. You'll see where we accomplished some of that. We prepared plutonium for disposition. We continued the receipt and safe storage of nuclear materials, including spent fuel. We made significant progress towards the closure of D area ash basin. We have not completed that, but we made a lot of progress on that. We were able to, even though limited budgets, identify and upgrade several areas of site infrastructure this year. In particular, a lot of roof replacements of some of those facilities that we have. We are upgrading our entire telephone system on the site, which you think of the site, there's 11,000 people at that site. They have to communicate with each other, so there is a significant telephone system network that we are in the process of upgrading on that. And also there are some significant upgrades to the laboratory facilities in order to, you know, our facilities have to, some of our facilities have to last through 2065, and therefore you have to maintain those facilities as you go. And lastly, we've met 100% of the 2015 FAA and RCRA regulatory milestones. Going forward now, that was like a highlight. Now in specifically, these are the actual metrics that we measure ourselves to see how good, how we're performing. In terms of liquid waste and the vitrification process, that's basically that sludge area that I talked about in the tanks in terms of removing that radioactive material there and combining it with molten glass and creating these canisters. Our target for FY15 was 156 of those. We accomplished 93 of those, and I explained before the challenge of why we did not accomplish that. Just as a reference, FY14 we had 126 of those. Cumulative to date, ever since we started doing this, we've done 3,970 of that. And this is where I would have three other columns on the sheet there. And just as a reference, if you, we had, our end state is that we projected to be, we need to do 8,000 of these canisters to be complete in terms of, by the time we're complete with the liquid waste, there'll be 8,000 of these, 8,582 of these canisters produced. And that's projected in the year 2038 is the year that we're projecting to do that. In terms of, again, liquid waste, the salt waste, saltstone processing, again, that's the other area of the tanks. You know, you have the sludge or the concentrate at the bottom, but then the salt, which is the other part of the solution, which we are then processing the salt solution, then we process it, and then we'll dispose of that in terms of the salt stone disposition on site in these disposal units here in the site. We had targeted 1,200, or I guess 1,200 kilogallons of, was our target. We accomplished 828, kilogallons processed. Again, that was because of the challenge that we talked about earlier. In FY14, we accomplished 1,167 of that. Cum to date, we've done 10,021. The target for that, we just started on that is 152,743. So, we're waiting for the new salt waste processing facility to be able to accelerate the processing of salt solution. That's projected to see in year 2040, again, based on our current level of funding. Okay, the last one in terms of liquid waste is tank closures. After you get all of the contents of the tanks, you have to then operationally close the tanks, which we, through approval with South Carolina DHEC, we basically fill the tanks with grout is our final solution for the tanks. We did accomplish, like I indicated before, we did close one tank in FY15 target. We've closed 7 tanks cumulative to date. Our tanks have been broken into 2 different style tanks, the old style, which I think there's 24 of the old style tanks, and then there's the new style, there's 27. Adding together, there's a total of 51 tanks on site, and we've closed 7 of those. Our target to close all the tanks, again, based on current funding, if you extrapolate that out, it would be 2042 for all tanks. The old style tanks, the target is 2032 to get all the old style tanks. Those are more vulnerable to leakage than the newer style tanks, so our priority is to do the old style tanks first. Okay, we talked about this, the transuranic waste, that's the WIP, temporarily halted, and therefore we have 0 true waste shipped. Both legacy, which is prior to 2019, we still generate some true here through our operations, but not to the level that we had in the legacy. The legacy, it's projected once WIP goes back into service, that all legacy true will be shipped out by 2018, assuming WIP opens up in time for us to continue to finalize all the legacy shipments there. And then the true waste, again, that's very small amounts, but we'll just continue to ship that on an ongoing basis until the site is complete with all of its closure activities.
This is Jim Ducey with you.
Yep.
This is one of the reasons we took out those last 2 charts. Is on the true waste, we projected 2018 to be finished with our projects. We know WIP may not be open by that time. And so we don't know when we're gonna ship the small amount of legacy waste left on site to WIP. And so to have a date out there is misleading to all of you. And when we looked at it this year, the decision was these numbers we know are gonna change. And so to put them there would be misleading you and the public to say, in 2018, we're gonna ship something to a facility we're not certain it's gonna be open by then.
Oh.
And so, that's part of the reason we took those 2 columns out. It's a budget commitment that we don't know that we're gonna have. This is the best example of why those columns were taken out.
Great, thank you, Jim. The other part of solid waste disposal is the mixed and low-level waste. And we combine those, but there's really 2 different, there's mixed waste and then there's low-level waste. Low-level waste is we are allowed to dispose of that on site. It's a very low level in terms of radioactivities, and therefore we can, dispose of that on site, and that's been approved through DHEC and what have you. Mixed low-level waste is really low-level waste with chemicals in it as well. That we cannot dispose of on site, and that gets shipped off site. In this particular case, it's being shipped to Utah. There's an approved place where that gets shipped off site on that. All of our legacy mixed and low level, which is both low level and mixed, what we call legacy, that's prior to 2018, that was all completed. We are done with the completion of the legacy. We, here again, similar to the other one, we still generate new mixed and low level waste, again, a low level amount. But the requirement here is not to allow any more than 400 cubic meters to accumulate at any point in time on site. And that's our target. Every year we measure against that, and we can't exceed that amount on site. And we haven't, even though, so our actual, we continue to meet that requirement. But it's basically as it generated, you move it off site type thing, except you have a small little bit of wiggle room there to accumulate enough so it's economical effectively to ship it off site when it's time to do that. Moving over to the nuclear material, spent nuclear fuel. Spent nuclear fuel, this is the receipt and storage. Think about spent fuel as sort of like a big inventory. And the inventory is really the L basin. And I think Maxine's there, so if there's any questions here. So in terms of the inventory, which is down here, we had at the end of FY14, we had 3,065 bundles. That's how we measure spent fuel. This is a bundle right here, this long tube there of spent nuclear fuel. We also have something that's called cores, and that's 120 cores. So that's basically the inventory on site of all the spent fuel that we have on site that we safely store here. Now, how does that inventory get changed? It can be changed to increase that by receiving new bundles coming into the site, and that's based on agreements with nuclear non-proliferation agreements. I think that's correct, that we have some coming in. We don't ever project a target for that because but we can tell you what we did receive. We received 4 additional bundles in FY15. So that would increase the inventory. However, we also targeted 80 to be removed, and that's packaged and shipped over to H Canyon to be dissolved over in H Canyon. We actually packaged 109 of these from the L Basin and moved those to H Canyon. So the net result of this is that we're no longer at 3,065 bundles in L Basin. We're at 2,960. So this is part of that budget. We talked about making progress. We have a large amount to go to get down to 0, but we are making progress and we are reducing our inventory of spent fuel here on site. And just a picture. This is what the rod is, and this is the vehicle of getting these bundles moved over to H Canyon. There will be these large casks which they transport those over to H Canyon. Shifting over to H Canyon now, we have two activities going on in the H Canyon. One is the spent nuclear fuel dissolving in that. This is over in H Canyon. This is those rods. They get sent into this, what's called a dissolver, and they're literally dissolved here in H Canyon. And in FY15, we had a target of 69 of those bundles that were shipped over to H Canyon to be actually dissolved, and our target is we did dissolve that. So we've dissolved a total of 80 bundles in H Canyon. The other area of operations in the nuclear materials area is plutonium. And what we have there, we prepared containers. This is a container of plutonium. We prepared 20 of these containers here. The target was to prepare 20 of those for disposition. Again, because of the pause, the operational pause and the other delay, we accomplished 8 of those containers that were prepared for disposition in 2015. Just for reference, in terms of, go back here to nuclear material, there is 5,600 of plutonium containers on site. I mean, the height. So this is that we ultimately have to disposition either, and when we say all 3 pass, that is either you could prepare those for MOX, you can prepare those to be sent to WIP, you can prepare those to be dissolved and then be processed through the liquid waste process. So this is one of the areas that we don't, we are doing what we can with the limited budgets that we have to actually make progress towards that number. And we are making progress, but again, the big bow wave is out later in the outer years. And target for plutonium is 2031 to have all of that dissolved. Again, assuming that we'd get the budget funding to do that. Last, I think, area of measurements and performance metrics is in the area of soil, water, and facilities. Like I said before, we've made the site, we identified geographically 515 areas of the site that need to be remediated, either through soil or water remediation on the site. We have already remediated 402 of 515. This year we didn't target any, and we did not obviously complete any. However, we were making large progress on a D area ash project, and this area here, once that gets remediated, that accounts for 4 waste sites. So once this is completed, we will have completed an additional 4 waste sites in terms of the performance metrics and in terms of waste site remediation. Lastly is the facilities of the site. You'll see a number there of, again, we did not demolish D&D, which is decommission and demolish any facilities on the site. Again, we don't have any funding to do that, and that's the lowest priority in terms of all the activities. And we have your cumulative D&D 289 buildings out of the 1,100 facilities we have on site, but we won't. This is probably the last step of the cleanup. The 2,065. This will probably be the last years of cleanup of the site. Is doing the actual D&D of the site. So we don't have any budget in the foreseeable future to do any more activity of that until we do the priority of liquid waste and the nuclear materials. That would come first, and then this will be the last thing that we would do on site.
I'll be gone too.
This is just a summary of everything I just said there, all in one chart there, all the targets and all of what we've completed and the cubes to date. So I won't go through that again. That's there for a reference. In the summary, we'll continue to track. We actually track and monitor these performance measures as our normal work process, and it's our obligation to share with the CAB, where we are in terms of our targets each year. For that, open it up to questions? Mouthful, you know.
Yeah.
Any,
Rich, this is Bob Dorcab. Thank you for the, presentation.
there's another exercise, again, I think, Doug Gency presented this to you before. It's called a life cycle plan. We evaluate after each year and what we've accomplished. We said, okay, based on that, based again, what our latest understanding of the funding would be, where do we think it's gonna, how long is it gonna take us to clean up the site? And our last plan of record says 2065. Now we're going, this year we will do reevaluate that life cycle plan to see, based on either new technology, we might be able to accelerate things faster, or based on other, we had a couple of hiccups in 2015, but will that impact us accomplishing the 2065 target? We'll evaluate that over this year, and we'll provide an update to the CAB what our latest thinking is. So it's constantly, every year you have to evaluate that, and you look at the long term as you're looking at the current year as well.
So Rich, Bob Dorcab again. That's why, when we sequence our action plan for the year, that's why we asked you to present this at the end of this year. So we have a kind of a recap of what the activity was for 2015. And then when the integrated, or the life cycle is presented at the beginning of next year, we can understand better why, say, dates are being projected out, maybe farther out than what they originally were. Okay.
And the other additional thing is, once we get the budget finalized for FY16, we can then operationalize and say how many canisters do we believe we can produce based on the budget that we get for liquid waste and nuclear materials the same way.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Clinton Angle Cab. Rich, I think it'd be useful if you'd give us every year for these main areas what the percentage of what percentage we've chewed away at on the total. It's difficult looking at this and trying to figure out as we go, where are we going? But for instance, if we look at a specific category, and we know that last year we had done up the 30% on it, and this year we have 20% to go or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It would be an easy scan, and I understand that this can't go out to the general public, but for our purposes around this table, I think it'd be really helpful to have percentages that every year we can look at and see how we're doing. It's I think, an easier way to.
I agree. I mean, in the past, we've provided those percentages on every one of the charts.
It's very handy.
Jim and I are going to kind of continue to work with headquarters, and I understand clearly not giving the dollar amounts and the forecasted dates out there, because those are, but is there a way that we can probably provide a percent accomplished or something like that? And so we'll work to see if there's any room that we can provide that information to you.
Maybe if we promised after the presentation, the last two columns, that we would ingest them before we left the room.
There we go. It's impossible. It kind of disintegrates in there. Yeah, agreed. Any other question, comment? Yeah, Dave.
Just one quick one, Rich. How much legacy true remains to be shipped?
Very little. Let me.
It's less than 600.
We're 95% complete on legacy true.
It's 600 cubic meters or something like that, Dave. I know it's 600 or over. It's all packaged and ready to go.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
Yeah.
what's that gonna do to you in 2018 and 2019 budget constraint? Do we have to pay the shipping? Is it gonna be an expensive shipping?
No, WIP always pays for the shipping.
Okay.
So really, it's not costing us much to keep it here sitting on a pad, and we do a little surveillance and maintenance on it, but there's costing us very little to have it sitting here.
Thank you.
You know, like, this is Jim Juicy, you know, the metrics that Rich presented today show one thing that you all should keep in mind. We are making progress. Some areas we're making more than others, but we are all steadily making progress to clean up the site, where our funding allows us to make progress. You know, and, you know, there are 2 other DOE sites that have high-level waste tanks that are not closing any and are not producing any glass. We're the only one in the EM complex that is doing that today. You know, and so, you know, we had challenges this year. We had issues that came up and it slowed down our process. But, overall, we still continue to, make some progress. So, you know, there is a light out there, and just, you know, there's a positive side to this story too.
Correct. Okay. Thank you.
This is Bob Dorcab. Before we move on to the committee discussion regarding a response to the recommendation 333 and a draft discussion, the 2 presentations that we received tonight, does this committee feel that these presentations should be included in the January full board meeting?
January is full with the work plan.
Oh.
That they
Work plan's done in February. I'm talking about the January board meeting?
they present their topics to you in January.
Okay. So these presentations that we heard today cannot be presented to the full board in January?
Unless
Well,
We don't have committee meetings in February, do we?
No.
no,
So in February, we won't have anything for the full board in March, right?
Right.
yes, you'll take this if you want stuff like this.
The February meeting is when we're gonna give the budget recommendation.
No, the IPL, you mean, what you just?
Right, yeah, when are we?
No, that's not due until April 30th, so you'll have.
Don't have a February meeting.
So we'll do it, we'll give that in March, so we'll vote on that in March.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty important that the full board hears the IPL.
In January.
Well, I mean, I'm not putting a time, but it's important, I think it's important that the IPL
IPL in January.
Okay.
Yeah, I would,
So that they can, so the board can understand it, because they have to give us a recommendation
Right.
at the end of April.
right.
And I guess you're gonna have to get a committee meeting in February then for these guys to do a recommendation.
Is April a hard date that we have to have that in by?
Yes.
Okay.
But at the end of April, April 3, so yes.
we have to have the recommendation
But you
voted on
have
by
to-
that time.
The way the recommendation process is set up, you have to do it in committee, draft it in committee, and then present it to the board. And so the only time you have to draft it is between now and February, so that you guys can discuss it at a meeting and then present it at the March board to vote on, to have it to us in time. So,
So what would you like to do for a committee meeting between now and?
Well, we don't have a committee meeting scheduled. And I don't see how normally we wouldn't. We have a full board meeting in January.
why don't we look at the schedule and see if we can tag off of another event that we have scheduled to do, the committee meeting?
The education meeting, the one on Monday starts at 1, right? And then the next day, Tuesday, is an all day?
That's February, this is the February meeting?
February 8th.
I don't know if it's too early, but for the one that's on Monday that starts at 1, could we maybe come in a little bit before?
You're gonna have are you having an exec meeting?
Yeah, because I don't think it's the full board, I think it's just that work plan, but,
Right. It's just,
I mean, if we're all gonna be here, just something to think about.
Meeting in the morning.
February 8th in the morning, like at 10?
Mhm.
say 11.
11.
We gotta clear. Yeah.
And that's the 8th.
Mm-hmm.
February 8th at 11?
You know that out.
Mhm.
Then you've got a captive audience,
And then
waiting right here.
in January, we'll get the IPL.
February 8th, since our work plan will just come in.
Jamming in that meeting.
Yeah, then,
Simon Cab, for future reference, could we keep that in mind so that we can do the IPL in January every year?
Yeah, we'll look at the process and if we need to move things around, then we can discuss that at the education and process session.
Well, we're gonna do it for this January. It should be every year.
Right.
right,
So we don't have to go through this again.
Yeah, okay. Mhm.
okay. And then as far as the, performance metrics, measurements, that will be in March. We can present that to the full board and,
Present that in March to the full board, and then, maybe by then you can have additional columns.
does the rest of the committee agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, next on our agenda is the committee discussion. On November 4th, we received a response from DOE regarding recommendation 333, timely cab notification of Savannah River site unusual events and issues. Recommendation manager on that was David Hoyle. Below is what's on the screen is the response. I don't know if you've all got a copy of this, but it's available. I can read the first two recommendations. In lieu of the first two recommendations, the department proposes the department will notify the chair or vice chair. Significant category 1 and 2 events under DOE's occurrence reporting program and other issues as they emerge by telephone call from a deputy designated federal officer or the director of the Office of External Affairs. This call will happen once the department has a clear understanding of the event or issue, but the information is not for dissemination beyond the chair or vice chair without DOE's concurrence. If a DOE SR update is issued on the event, no phone call will take place. Okay, is there any feedback from this committee in regards to that response?
I don't remember what our first two recommendations were with relation to this response.
Your first two recommendations were on the emergency, management courtesy notification, and second was the environmental.
Oh, yeah.
Both of those involve regulators or people that have a need to receive that notification to do their jobs. And as we discussed with you when we submitted the recommendation, we thought that was beyond what the Systems Advisory Board should be getting. And so, we've come back and offered to do what Bob just said.
Mm-hmm. And that's the process you're going to follow. Well, I think, unless the committee has an objection to the response, I think there's been a proposal from the.
the HB line agitator would have been, you would have received, the chair would have received a call on. Trying to think of one that, we had a contamination on an air bottle. He wouldn't get a call on that one. We told you about that at the CAB meeting when we met with you last month. That's the kind of difference. They get categorized as, and if they are in one of those two categories, we will make a notification to you guys.
Can you, I don't know if you have this available, can you tell us what the definition of significant category 1 and 2 are?
I don't have it with me, but I will tell you that on an average, we only have about 12 of those a year. If we get one a month, it might be. They impact safety of a facility. It's operational safety. And so that's what we would call you.
So somebody hit by a car, you wouldn't call?
Now, well, you might get an update on it because we might do a news release or something like that on it. So, you know, that's why we're trying to balance out what we're using to communicate with you guys on. There are things that we would do our best to get you the information once we understand what the information is. And that's not always the day we find out. It may take us 2 or 3 days to find out what it truly is before we make a call. But we will make a call.
Jim? Mike Michelangelo, DOE. Here's what the definition from the DOE order, you can find this if you go online and Google it. The DOE directives is order 232.22. Significance category 1 is non-operational emergency events. That means something that we did not activate the emergency response organization for. That caused actual harm, posed the potential for immediate harm or mission interruption due to safety, system failure, and required prompt mitigative action or constituted an egregious non-compliance with regulatory requirements that created the potential for actual harm or mission interruption. That's what the Canyon agitator was given a significance category of 1. Significance category 2 is circumstances that reflect a degraded safety margin, but take primary action along with the modified normal operation to prevent an adverse effect on safe facility operations, worker or public safety and health, including significant personnel injuries, regulatory noncompliance, or public and business interests. Those are the 2 highest levels of operational reporting system requirements.
Okay.
Somebody was going to ask that question.
You know what 3 is?
Yeah.
What is 3, just for sake of discussion?
Significant category 3 is events or circumstances, localized implications, including personal injury, environmental releases, equipment damage, or hazardous circumstances that were locally contained and does not immediately suggest broader systematic concerns.
Yeah. So, this committee, if we, I'm just paraphrasing or trying to understand, if we go ahead and close this recommendation, going forward, the department is committing to notifying the chair or vice chair of significant category 1 and category 2 events, and that would commence immediately, I guess, or after we accept this, or excuse me, close this recommendation. Is that fair to say? Okay. So the committee okay with that?
So moved.
All right. And then the third recommendation that was identified on 333 was to notify the chair or vice chair of upcoming events to SRS by the elected officials, dignitaries, or other VIPs, and they're saying partially accepted. The department will continue to invite the chair to attend events during VIP visits where appropriate, but will not in general notify the chair about all VIP visits. I don't know, Harold Simon, you're here, you're the chair. have you been invited to VIP visits already?
Yes.
Okay. Does the committee have a problem with the way DOE responded to this? All right.
Well,
Go ahead.
kind of depends on who determines what's appropriate. 'Cause, you know,
Let me give you an example. We could have a VIP come visit for a working meeting on the site. There are no stakeholder interactions. There is no reason, and for those, we would not notify anybody that they are coming on site. So
Okay.
the appropriateness is there gonna be interactions with stakeholders? And is that part of what they're going to do? And if it is, we always invite the CAB to participate. So when I look at it, you know, when we did the operational pause, the Assistant Secretary for Environmental Management came in the morning for 2 hours, talked with us and left. I'm not notifying anybody about that. I didn't. So that's what I'm looking at is, what is the person coming here for? Is it for work, or is there an opportunity to have interactions with you or anyone else? And if there is, we will make sure you're aware of it. But to say I'm gonna let every VIP, you know about every VIP visit, I'm not allowed to do that sometimes. You know, we have a VIP that comes in and they don't want any, the guidance is there'll be no communications beyond those people that need to know that they're coming to be on site. And so that limits what I can, you know, we can tell you. So there's no reason for me to tell you that we're there. My goal is to make sure that if there's an opportunity for you to meet with them, you have that opportunity.
Okay. Yeah. So. Okay, and then the fourth recommendation as part of 333, to add or increase the priority by SRS contractors to DOE of unusual events or issues related to EM missions as an award fee criterion is rejected by the department. They're saying, DOE saying these incentives already exist under the current contract. Again, does anybody object to that response? All right.
let me just ask a question on that one. I'm not saying I object at all. Is the department satisfied with the time frame that the contractor notified them of the agitator issue, for example? That took several months to evolve, and seems to me it was
I think there's more elements there than just notification. When they found it and they notified us is one thing. The fact that it took so long to find it, we have an issue with that.
Okay.
So, you know, and that's why I say that in the existing contract, we have ways to evaluate them and determine whether they met what we think they need to do in that facility.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, when they found it and they notified us, so that's an after the fact. It's how long did it take you to find it that we have to also look at. So, you know, and then if they find something and it takes them a month to know about it, if they haven't notified us about it, we're not happy. You know, we don't want any surprises, and that's a surprise that we don't, you know, that would be unacceptable. And there are actions that we can take on that. So,
and you're saying here that there are criterion already existing in the contract for dealing with the contractor on those situations.
Right. Well, what this committee should do is report back to the board in January that we're going to close this recommendation. And that's what we'll do. All right, unless there's any objection to that. All right, Harold, is that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
Yeah, and the CAB will make note of that, and it will be on their report also.
okay, very good. The next point of, committee discussion on our agenda is the draft recommendation, regarding the budget for Savannah Riverside. It was originally, composed by, Nina Spinelli. And, we're here today to discuss, issues that this committee may have with this recommendation, changes. Should we move forward? Is it still timely? Any feedback? I'm more than willing to open it up to,
Is this the one that we decided to not go forward with?
Because of the timing.
No, no, not that one. I think this is the one there might have been a concern that there was like a conflict of interest in this recommendation.
Conflict of interest.
There was some email going back and forth.
well, we received feedback from, Department of Energy that, what we were asking for in this recommendation, they could not do. Is that
the partnership with the chamber?
yes?
Yeah.
Well, not only that, but, you know, basically it's DOE trying to lobby Congress through intermediary parties, and that's not allowed by law.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of it so much as a partnership, more as, and maybe, you know, if it's worth revisiting, that the chamber, and I'm not sure how the process works now, contacts you, and the information that we get during these presentations, they get as well. Because I think the feedback that we hear constantly is everything is based on the budget. And if there can be more people that are saying that there's a greater need to make sure that the site gets the budget that it needs in order to fulfill all those milestones, I don't know how else we can push for that.
Let me, Jim just to give it, let me clear up a couple things. First of all, the chamber trip to Washington DC is a joint Aiken, Augusta, Edgefield chamber event. There are a number of local chambers that are involved in it. We do not support them directly on their visit. I work and set up the appointments with DOE for them, and that's they get the same briefings that you guys get about the budget, about any issues up here. But they don't go up there just to support Savannah Riverside, they go up there to support Fort Gordon too. And so, you know, we do not directly get involved with that. Our contractors can talk to them as a third party and give them briefings. But we're, you know, I have a real hard time with this one because I see a real conflict of us trying to use somebody to, you know, you're all free to write your congressman anytime you want about our budget or to make a recommendation. We can't encourage you to go do that if there's an issue. So we walk a very fine line in this stuff.
But so, I mean, in the essence of the recommendation, you're already doing that. When the chamber comes to you and needs help, you're already providing that information.
Yes. We give them the same information that we give any member of the public or any group, you know. The SRS Community Reuse Organization is one of the major contributors to that group, and they have, you know, we meet with them on a monthly basis and talk about site status and everything else. So, you know. And the chambers are all part of those organizations that we meet with on a regular basis.
Well, I was gonna say, in lieu of what we've just learned about the way DOE interacts with the Chamber of Commerce of multiple communities, is there a need to continue with this recommendation?
I don't think so.
I don't know, Clint, you have any feedback on that? No. Okay. All right. Kel?
Well, we got our answer there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rejected.
I always wondered.
Yeah, well, I'll just open it up. David? Harry spoke up.
Given that same information. You really can't do anything without a budget.
Great. Great. Okay. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll table this recommendation for now.
Well, I think we should.
Just withdraw it.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's dead. It is dead. Okay.
Thanks, Nina.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you for your hard work.
Thanks, Nina.
Thank you for your hard work. Okay, that completes our committee discussion. And, what we'd like to do now is ask for any public comment, from anybody here, and also online. If there's any comment that needs to be made, you're welcome to do it right now. If there is no public comment, is there any other comment that, from the committee that needs to be made?
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, sounds good. David Hoyle?
I did this in another committee. Shortly, we'll be talking about our work plan for the coming year. And as we went through discussions in our meetings this year, I would keep little notes on things that I thought we could maybe add to next year's work plan. And with your permission, I'd like to just share some of those. And we could consider whether we want to add them to the work plan in, February or whenever that happens. Ones I got on my list are review how DOE performance assessments of contractors are used for determination of award fee. Thought it'd be useful to get a briefing. There was quite a bit of interest earlier in one of our meetings on how our contractors and DOE are doing in terms of recruiting new young scientists and engineers. And so I thought it'd be useful to get a briefing on the results and trends in contractor and DOE recruiting of scientists and engineers and other needed disciplines for the future workforce. I thought it'd be useful to hear what DOE's process is for assessing contractor performance in general. And also, I thought it'd be useful to understand what grants DOE Savannah River issues and how they manage those grants and what amounts those grants are for. That's all.
Okay. Thank you, David, for those comments. At this time, I think we can conclude the meeting, and I do want to excuse me, is there a comment?
Harold Simon, Cam. As the committees look at the topics to be considered for the work plan, I would recommend that you prioritize those topics because the ones with a higher priority will may be able to get on the list if the space is available, so that you know exactly what your priority is for all those topics that you have to be considered.
Right. We do that in February, though, when we meet and discuss.
Yes, the work plan itself, DOE will present to you their recommendation for us to consider.
Right.
And then when you meet in February, you look at what they have and what you have.
Right.
As you do your work plan.
Right. But of course, the suggestions that David provided, or David Hoyle provided, are going to be included in.
Contact for that, yeah, I'll send out to the point of contact to include.
Right. Okay.
David, what were the 1 and 3 sounded really similar to me. What?
Great.
Well, one was how DOE determines award fee.
Okay.
And the other one was, what is DOE's process for assessing performance by the contractor? And there's some relationship there because depending on the performance, they determine award fee. So there is some relationship between the two, but they are distinct as well.
Okay.
Yeah. What will happen with these work plan ideas is a presentation will have to be developed around that. So we'll have to identify who would be able to present information in regards to those inquiries.
David, I appreciate you bringing those things up. But one of the things, I mean, I've shared this in full board. I think we're getting to a point where we're asking oversight questions and we're no longer an advisory board. And it seems like we're asking for some information that doesn't really fall under our stuff.
VM work. Aren't you interested in how they
I am.
That's the performance of that work?
We want to get into the weeds on how they assess each individual contractor.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, maybe you and I just differ on this. I mean, I think we are here to give them advise DOE on what we think is going on. And I think we're just getting a little bit out there. I mean, from my understanding of reading our purview and reading all our stuff is we take the information they give us and we give them advice back. We advise back.
But I think we can ask questions.
I think it's very good to ask questions. But I've almost sensed in some of our meetings, there's a distrust of what we're getting from them. And I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but that's a feeling I get in some of our meetings, that we distrust what DOE is giving us.
Well, in some of the incidents that have happened in the past year, there has been questions by board members from time to time saying, where was DOE when this happened? Why didn't DOE detect this? And that's part of contractor performance assessment.
Okay.
They should be there looking over the contractor's shoulder, trying to prevent incidents just as well as the contractors are. And performance, I mean, that's DOE's whole job here, is assessing the performance of the contractor in meeting contract requirements. Why shouldn't we ask how they do that?
This is an issue with you. None of the topics that David brought up are topics that we couldn't do a presentation on. But they're, like, am I gonna get down to the nuts and bolts that he wants it to? Maybe not. But there are, we can tell you how we do what our award fee process is. We can tell you how we are involved in overseeing the contractor. We can answer those questions. And what you do with it once we give you the information is internal to this committee and to the CAB. But I did not hear any topics that I could not get a presentation done on by somebody within our organization. Now, if you want to get, given that you have 20 minutes or 30 minutes for a presentation, it's not going to be in depth. So we're going to do high level. All our award fee documentation for all our contractors on the EM side of the house is posted on our website. You can see how we rated them, what we thought of their performance, what we saw good, and what we saw bad. That gets posted every year. And so, we can talk about those topics for you. I have no problem with us doing a presentation on any of the recommendations that they would make. So.
Okay.
This year, isn't this year the year that we look at the next few years as far as awarding contracts are concerned?
We're in the process of, DOE is process of looking at a strategy for awarding a new liquid waste, putting out a new liquid waste contract for bid, and then in 2 years, we would do a new M&O contractor.
I would think that would be confidential information.
Well, but you're talking about two different things here. David wants us to tell him how annually we evaluate our contractors to give them the money that we give them at the end of the year for award fee for their performance. And that is done every year, and that is a public record that we post on our website.
Okay.
How we do that process, we can cover in a presentation too, and that is really, a lot of these things are, we create a milestone in the contract that says you will produce X number of canisters a year. If you do less than that, you get this amount of money. If you do it, you get this amount. If you do more than that, you get this amount. And so a lot of those things are already predetermined by what we put in our contract on an annual basis. And those are performance-based initiatives that we set up every year with the contractors. So that's all public record. So we can talk to you about that. The process for hiring a new contractor to do the work at the cement site, that is procurement sensitive, and only a small group of people, and we're not gonna talk about that. We will tell you, Jack Craig, when he's here, he will tell you about what our strategy is when we're allowed to tell you what our procurement strategy is. We will tell you about that, but the actual procurement process is internal to DOE. So, yeah.
Harold Simon Cab. Question for clarification. When the list was given by David, I know, Tina said that she will send that list to the, point of contact. Who prioritizes the list?
Well, when the point of contacts look at them, I don't think that they actually prioritize them. I think that they just put them, consolidate the list and then bring them to you, in the February meeting. After discussion, I'm not sure.
Harold, it's nineteen ninety DOE. In the past, it's set a work plan. It's the chair of the committee and the POC work to figure out the prioritization. Now, sometimes it's a scheduling issue of the topic itself.
I quite understand that. That's what was my question earlier, that the chairs or the committee and the committee chair should prioritize the list. So that when you get to the meeting in February, you only have so much time. And so the topics with a higher priority will be given precedence.
Yeah. Rich Olson, again, to leverage off of Maxine, in the past, in the January meetings, the federal POCs would at the January meeting present a list of work plan proposed topics prioritized, but that list then would be taken to the February meeting, and jointly, the CAB member and the POC would then collectively either add or delete from the list, and then prioritize the list. So I think January is not a prioritized list that the Fed POCs would provide you. They were just going to give you a list of topics they believe would be of interest to the CAB. The February meeting is really the prioritization meeting.
Right. Yes. All I'm saying is, January, DOE comes to us with a recommended list to be considered.
Okay. Not prioritized.
Hold on. That's mixing apples and oranges. What I'm saying is, at the committee level, the committee members provide a list of topics. We can only get so many topics on the work plan. So if the committee prioritize whatever they are submitted from the committee side, then if we can only have space for 3 topics, then the 3 top priority will be considered to be placed on that list. I'm not talking about DOE, I'm talking about what the committee generates.
Well, but Harold, the way I remember it, in the February meeting last year, there was some give and take between the point of contact and the committee chair and the vice chair. And, timeliness of presentation, as well as, how much can we fit in on each committee meeting, so there has to be some, it's not a one-way thing, it's a give and take, is the way I remember it.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is, based on the time available, if you have 10 topics, you can only do 3. Which are the top 3? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that'll be identified. Yeah.
And when the list is sent to the point of contact, I'd like to be copied on that, and the vice chair, and I don't know if the committee chairs want to be copied on that.
You mean the list that David gave this evening?
Yeah, from all the committees.
Oh, I'll copy you on the last thing, and I'll copy you on this email too.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to end this meeting and wish everyone a happy holidays.
Thank you.
in,
We ready, James?
Virginia.
Good evening. Welcome everybody to the Disposition and Remediation Committee. I'm Tom Barnes. I'm chairman of the committee. Other members of the committee is Bill Rhodes, Vice Chair Louis Chavis, Don Gillis, Eleanor Hobson, and Ed Sturkin. And who do we have online, James?
Just a couple people right now.
Okay, a couple of people online. We got 3 presentations tonight, and I think we'll just jump right into those. Our first one was Avery Hammock, point of contact status update.
Waiting in the wings here. Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
Like Rich, mine is actually pretty short today. So this first one is a little bit of old news, but I don't think we've covered it in a committee meeting, so I just wanted to touch on it. On October 16th, the National Wild Turkey Federation Wheeling Sportsmen, which is an organization that provides outdoor opportunities to people with disabilities, conducted a one-day hunt for deer. Hunters harvested 13 deer and 2 hogs. So that was a big success. Doesn't actually really fall under this committee as much, except that it falls under my AM, so I kind of grabbed it out of our views. And along those same lines, the annual deer control activities, i.e. hunts, ran from November 7th through December 4th. The hunt activities involved more than 200 hunters, encompassing as many as 10,000 acres every Wednesday and Saturday during that month. The hunts are conducted to manage deer populations on site and to reduce the deer vehicle collision numbers. I don't have a final tally, but through November 28th, a total of 256 deer and 66 hogs were harvested, monitored, and released to hunters. Okay, so in November, SRS participated in the annual site environmental report and environmental monitoring workshop, which is all of EM gets together and does that. And SRS's annual report was held up as a model for the rest of the complex to emulate. And a lot of that is thanks to feedback from the CAB and from the public and the efforts of the SRS and DOE staff to really kind of make it more readable and everything. And that was largely driven by focus from this group. So I thought that was something noteworthy. November 10th of 2015, which was 15 days or 5 days before the 15th deadline, I think it was due November 15th, but it was early. DOE submitted the FFA Appendix E, long-term projections, revision 0 to the Environmental Protection Agency and DHEC. And as you know, this appendix proposes milestones for cleanup activities and deliverables required by the FFA in the out years. So this would be fiscal years 17 and 18. And you guys get a presentation on that every year, and will again. And Area Completion Project has no public documents available for review at this time, but there are 2 new documents out on the website that are final. They aren't out for comment. One is the Annual Corrective Action Report for the F Area Hazardous Waste Management Facility, also the H Area Hazardous Waste Management Facility, and the Mixed Waste Management Facility. And the other one is a fact sheet on the 5th 5-year remedy review report for Savannah River site operable units with native soil covers and or land use controls. So those are out there for your reading pleasure. Any questions?
Any questions?
Can we just get that email, the link to those 2 that are new?
Sure, they're on the website, but we can, I think.
If you want to spout them off to me, I'll type it in now.
I don't actually have the link, but it's on the, under documents for public review on the external website.
Under document?
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing, I did poke around on the website a little bit just to see if there was any other item of interest to let y'all know. And I don't know if anybody sort of played around on our website, but we have fact sheets on almost everything that we do on site. So that's a really good resource. If you guys have any questions or just sort of want to dig deeper into any topics that you hear about, there is a ton of information in those fact sheets on the website, so kind of FYI.
Thank you, Avery,
Anything
very
else?
much.
Okay. Yep.
Next is annual integrator operable unit update, Candace Freeman.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Candace Freeman. I am a general engineer with the U.S. Department of Energy, Savannah Riverside. This presentation is usually done by our Federal Facilities Agreement Manager, Brian Hennessy. He is out on a detail at the Los Alamos site office, so I am filling in for him tonight. So and also we have who can help me answer any additional questions if you have. James Cooper, he is the principal engineer with SRS, that he's on the project team for all of the IOUs on site. Okay, the purpose of this presentation is to provide an update of the Integrated Operable Units, IOUs, program for the Facilities Disposition and Site Remediation Committee. Our agenda would be to talk about give a description of the IOU program, to give a status of the Penn Branch IOU, give a status of the Lower Three Runs IOU, and to show you a path forward for the entire IOU program. In the map, it shows that the SRS streams, the Savannah Riverside streams, were added to the Federal Facility Agreement in fiscal year 1997. Savannah Riverside is segregated into 6 different integrated operable units, IOUs: the Upper Three Runs, Savannah River IOU, the 4 Mile Branch, Penn Branch, Steel Creek, Lower Three Runs, and Lower Three Runs. That's the 6 integrated operable units. And in those IOUs, we look at the surface water, the sediments, the floodplain soils, and biota, which are plants and animals. The purpose of the IOU program, what we do is we evaluate the contaminants in the Savannah River stream system, and we look at 3 different things. We evaluate the human health risk in the stream corridors, we assess the ecological health of the stream system, and we monitor stream contaminant levels based on IOU and other data. We also determine whether or not early cleanup actions are needed, and the final IOU cleanup decisions are made upon completing all operable unit cleanup actions within each watershed. And this is a flow chart of the IOU program as a 3-phase strategy. The first phase is the creation of the IOU work plan. In phase 2, we collect and evaluate data. We do IOU periodic reports. And then based on where we are as far as completing some of the operable units within the integrated operable unit, we would go on to complete an early action, which would lead to phase 3, which would be the IOU investigation and feasibility study documentation, and then the final IOU remedial action. Currently, we have 5 IOUs within phase 2. That's the Upper Three Runs, 4 Mile Branch, Penn Branch, Steel Creek, and the Savannah River. In phase 3, we have the Lower Three Runs operable unit. The IOU program in the phase 2, the screening process. We look at the phase 2 receptors, the human health
and we look at, different scenarios, which is the on-site workers, the adolescent trespassers, the hypothetical residents, the fishermen, and just, sustenance levels with meat consumption only from fish and the recreational hunter. And we also look at the ecological risk, and we use the, scenarios of benchmark screening, modeling, and biological data. In the early action human screening levels, we look at the risk as being as 1 in 10,000 cancer level risk, or 3 times greater than the non-cancer threshold, a hazard quotient of 3. Program involvement. This is just a pictorial view of all of the different entities that we gather information from and comments from about the IOU program. There's the academia, the Citizens Advisory Board, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, DOE, the public, South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, Natural Resource Trustees, and the Environmental Protection Agency. Now I'll move on to the current status of the Penn Branch IOU. We started the field start in December of 2002. And the current phase 2 activities that were completed and are about to get started. We started the first phase 2 field start in December 2004. We completed the periodic report number 4 in July of this year, 2015. And we're planning to do the 4th phase 2 field start in May 2016. The current plan is to do a phase 3 field start in November 2032. And again, in the map, you could see that the Penn Branch includes a lot of work in K area. So that's why the field, being that there's continuing missions in K areas, that's why the field start, the phase 3 field start has been extended out to 2032. Because these IOUs, they can't really be completed until all of the missions within the area has been closed. Again, this is more on the status of the Penn Branch IOU. The periodic report, the Rev 0, was submitted in July 2015. And during the human health evaluation, no problems warranting action were identified. In the ecological evaluation, traffic modeling showed that there was a potential risk from mercury to the river otter, the belted kingfisher, the blue heron, and in Penn Branch, but it was also in background locations. And no problems warranting actions were identified. And there were some data needs that were identified, that the fish body, burden data, the predators, regional and benthic species, and the fish and microinvertebrate assemblage surveys needed to be completed. Next, I move on to the lower 3 runs status update. And on the map, lower 3 runs, you see a lot of Par Pond, our area, a portion of P area, a portion of the railroad, I guess, better words, and the tail portion of the site. And the tail, that's the part of the site that runs through Allendale and Barnwell County. Okay, in 2009-2010 time period, we completed extensive characterization along the upper in the map, that's the yellow shaded areas, and the middle and lower portions of the IOU, that's the peach shaded area. The periodic report number 4
was approved in September 2012, and it was decided that an early action should be taken in the middle and lower subunits below the Power Pond Dam, and that was completed in 2012. In that particular, in that early action, what we did was we removed cesium-137 contaminated sediment and soil in three different areas along the tail. And we added additional fencing, and we posted over 2,000 warning signs and warning and no trespassing signs, because it was, what we did was we posted those signs on both ends of the tail, because what it is that this portion of the site runs through a lot of personal and private property. So the signs were placed and additional fencing was placed to deter any people from coming in and possibly receiving any contamination from the sediment and soil near the lower Three Runs Creek. And the phase 3 field start was completed in March 2013. More on the status of lower Three Runs IOU. The phase 3 final assessment, it focused on the upper subunit, which was Power Pond, the pre-cooler ponds, and the canal system. So for the, as I stated in an earlier slide, the lower Three Runs IOU has made it to the phase 3 of the IOU program. And the scoping for the final assessment, which is the baseline risk assessment, we're defining exposure areas and determining data sufficiency. And they completed the risk scenarios. Under the human health risk assessment was the on-site worker scenario, and under the ecological assessment, the trophic modeling was going to be done on the great blue heron, the raccoon, the belted kingfisher, and the river otter. The evaluation of poops at Pond B, long-lived reptiles, and other biological data. Jim, was this one of the alligators that were seen at Power Pond? Okay. The potential exposure areas at the lower Three Runs IOU. The exposure area, we define it as a location where the receptors, human or wildlife species, may reasonably be assumed to move about and have contact with environmental media. Data sufficiency, all of the different points that you see on the map, the green and the yellow. That's just ensuring that adequate data exists to support the phase 3 decision making. And all of these different points that you see on the map are data sets where we collected data for the upper portions of the lower Three Runs IOU. This is a aerial view of Pond C and Power Pond. Pond C is 132 acres, while Power Pond in its entirety is 2,640 acres. This is just another portion of Power Pond, where you can see even though there's some water there's also a substantial amount of vegetation near the parts of Power Pond that come close to a body of land. And this is just another area that's near a canal, Jim, is this near a canal system, this particular picture?
I'm sorry?
But this picture, is it near a canal system?
Yeah, it's at the end of the canal.
Okay. And this is just a closer view of the type of vegetation that's in Power Pond. currently. Another, view, when the samplers were out on the boat, the Park Pond. Again, another view. This is actually the Park Pond. Is this the Park Pond Dam or?
That's the Pond C Dam.
Okay, that's what it is. And this is the one with the road. That comes across. So this is the Pond C Dam. Another bridge where, not a bridge, where samplers may go out. The bubble. Jim, I'm sorry. This is called the bubble.
Yeah, it's called the bubble up. It's actually the hydraulic connection between Pond C and Park Pond.
I couldn't remember the full name. Like I said earlier, this was the road that runs across the Pond C Dam. And, the North Arm Canal Inlet. Like I said, there's a lot of water, but there's also a substantial amount of vegetation. And this is the aerial view of Pond B, which is 202 acres in size. And another view, actually out on the water of Pond B. This picture was taken at the dam near Pond B. Pond 4, another one of the ponds in the upper lower 3 runs subunit. And the canal system between Pond B and Park Pond, which is also known as the North Arm. And this is an outlet structure to Joyce Branch that's near our area. And during the summertime, this is a picture of the plush vegetation and water out there, Pond A, in the summer, which sits north of and in the wintertime, same area, Pond A. On to the path forward for the IOU program. So the upper 3 runs, IOU, in fiscal year 14, the periodic report number 4 was completed. The final rod is currently scheduled for 2040. For 4 Mile Branch, the periodic report number 5 is scheduled to be completed in fiscal year 2016, and the final rod is scheduled for 2038. In Penn Branch, periodic report number 4 was submitted, Rev 0 was submitted in fiscal year 15, and the final rod is scheduled to be completed in 2037. For the Steel Creek IOU, the periodic report number 6 is scheduled to be completed in fiscal year 18, and the final rod to be done in 2039. The lower 3 runs, this baseline risk assessment, which supports the phase 3 of the IOU program. As I stated earlier, this is the IOU that is the only one that's made it to the phase 3 of the IOU program. And the baseline risk assessment is currently scheduled for fiscal year 17 and issuing the final rod in 2020. The Savannah River and floodplain swamp, the periodic report is scheduled to be completed this fiscal year 2016, and the final rod to be issued in 2041. This completes my presentation. Do we have any questions?
Nina Spinelli Cab. So slide number 9, towards the very beginning, really worries me about the mercury to the river otter, a potential risk. I mean, I'm looking at the picture of the very cute little river otter, and that really concerns me.
I have to ask Jim to assist me with this.
Right now, trophic modeling, I guess mercury was introduced into a lot of the waters that we see on site through river pumping. And that there's some connection that we've seen from the industries upstream of SRS, and we used to pump river water into these canal systems. We believe that's how a lot of the mercury has actually been put in place in some of the canals, water systems. Right now, there is background locations that also show mercury, and that's from deposition from other sources too. This particular slide or bullet, I think, is a little misleading in that the trophic modeling shows a potential risk from mercury to the river otter, bellfish, kingfisher, and blue heron on a trophic level of what they're eating and consuming and living in. However, there were no problems warranting action based on that trophic modeling as it stands right now. So there will be additional information collected through the periodic report, data collection for Penn Branch. And as Candace mentioned, this is one of those units that is actually separated out by several years. So there will be additional data needs that we will pull in, and mercury will certainly be one of those needs to make sure that we don't miss anything on that evaluation.
And so do y'all work with DHEC and EPA if you're pumping that water in and you've got a strong feeling that it's not sourced through Savannah River site? Is there a process in how y'all work together, or?
Well, we certainly work together. The EPA and DHEC are aware with their own sampling events that there is mercury within the Savannah River. And they also are aware of what we have been finding because we published these results with the core team for the IOU process. Beyond that, I guess I couldn't speak specifically to their programs or their actions on that either.
Yeah. And from DHEC, do y'all know, I guess, who or what could be contributing to the mercury discharge? Is that something we can get?
Yeah, we can look into it.
Not put you on the spot since you're here.
Yeah, our surface water project manager, Cameron.
Our fish project manager, Jeff Joyner, who could speak more on that than, so mercury is seen, as one of the largest pollutants for fish all over South Carolina. That's what they're meaning by these background locations. Also have it in, we can't, it's not necessarily that we're saying, Savannah Riverside is killing river otters, you know, it's all over the state.
And I think that's what's important for us to bring out too, is because I think a lot of times when we talk about mercury at the site, I mean, that's just what people think, is that it's coming from the site. So it would be helpful if we can kind of have that information presented, that you're pumping other water in to these streams as well. And so it's not necessarily mercury that was made at the site, but from other sources as well.
It's just hard to pinpoint something like that when you're getting it from that location. It's either the same amount, or even higher amount.
And then the only other question I have is, could we get a definition or like a link emailed about what, is it trophic?
Trophic modeling.
Can we just get that emailed? Like, I don't want to Wikipedia, if there's like a source of what that means.
I can give you my interpretation. My eco person isn't here tonight, but trophic modeling, if you look, I kind of look at it as a like the food chain and how a benthic organism, like a little mayfly, might get eaten by a fish, and the fish will get eaten by a river otter or a blue heron. And of course, the end result is the more that the benthic organism has in it, the more the fish and the otter will accumulate.
It's like a food chain, kind of.
Like that food chain, right? And that's, I believe, that's my simplistic way to look at it.
I like that.
And
That's
I'm not
good.
gonna go-
No, that's good. That's a good way to characterize it.
All right.
And if you like, we can talk to our project managers and see if they wouldn't mind doing, presentation on that.
That would be great if we can maybe talk about a presentation.
Is that Beth or Jeff? Is that who you were talking about?
But Beth Cameron?
All right. Okay. I've got that on the to-do.
You hadn't used such a cute picture of those otters. Totally glazed over that.
Do you have any additional questions?
Thank you, Candace. Next presentation is, Understanding Risk Part 3, Remedy Selection, Jeff Ross.
Well, good evening, and I'm the shorter version of Walt Kabilis. If you remember Walt, I think he did the first two parts of this for you guys, big tall guy. And so he talked about concentration and I think mass terms, kind of basic science on trying to understand, what we measure in terms of trying to find out what's out there in soil or groundwater. And then I think he also talked about radioactivity and kind of the way that we go about looking at risk in terms of how we measure risk and then ultimately how we make decisions on it. And so I'm going to kind of take the third part of this, which is talking about how we kind of decide on what type of remedy we're going to select if we determine that there's a problem that warrants some type of action. I'm a geologist and technical lead for the reactor areas and A&M area at SRS. Work for environmental compliance and area completion projects for Savannah River Reclamation. So in looking at just provide some background information a little bit, we have to go out and evaluate our waste units and determine whether or not we have a problem and what's there. And so, part of the process is trying to determine, what contaminants are present, how much is there, and where those contaminants are, whether they're in the soil, in the groundwater, or in surface water. Then we go through a risk assessment process where we look at who or what can be exposed. You just heard about, the ecological component, especially associated with our IRU programs. Are those contaminants, if they're present, harmful? So we may find things present in the environment that are not naturally there, but that doesn't necessarily mean they actually pose any type of risk to either humans or ecological receptors. And then we look at the probability or the likelihood that if something is contaminated, does that pose a risk that's high enough that warrants taking an action? So sometimes the risks are so very low that they don't kind of meet our threshold for taking action. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later too. The remedy selection phase, which I'll spend the most time on today, really there's kind of three parts to that. We look at alternatives analysis. So basically, what types of alternatives do we have to address the problem that we've identified? And so we do basically come up with a list of different types of alternatives that we evaluate and compare against one another. And we have a fairly prescriptive process that we use that the EPA has laid out way back when they established the Superfund program in the 1980s. So that then once we've selected an alternative, that goes into a proposed plan. That proposed plan goes out for public review so that the public can comment on it. And those are usually done administratively. We put those in the libraries for the public to review. And if there's enough interest in a specific proposed plan, we'll have a public meeting and actually present the information and take questions. So recently, we did one about a year ago for sea area operable unit. And so, and some of the larger areas where we do proposed plans, we'll actually proactively do kind of a public workshop where we'll go out and get input kind of as we go through the process. So, and then the last piece is really DOE, EPA, South Carolina DHEC goes through documenting that in a legal record of decision. And so that basically lays out the problem, all the different alternatives that we evaluated, what was selected as the actual remedy to fix that problem, and then ultimately what we're going to achieve with that cleanup. And so, and then that goes into the public record, and then there's follow-on documents that actually talk about the construction of how we do that work. So kind of looking again at the data evaluation stage, at Savannah River site, typically we think of media as just being like soil and groundwater, but we'll also evaluate residual concrete slabs to see if there's any contamination associated with those. Surface water, of course, is important. You heard a lot about that with the IOU program. Soils information. This actually was at Savannah River site. I know it's a little bit misleading with the snow on the ground. But every once in a while, we'll get some snow. Railroad track bed gravels, for example, even, we'll take a look at those to see if there's a problem there. And then, of course, groundwater, which is one of our major medias of concern that we're looking at. The risk assessment process, again, just kind of some general information on that. Obviously, the three parties, DOE, EPA, and DHEC, use those to determine if, again, cleanup is needed. So we may not exceed a threshold level that requires cleanup. And then specifically, what will be cleaned up? Is it soil? Is it groundwater? Is it surface water? And to what level? So we're going to reduce the contamination to something considered to be safe for either human health or ecological receptors. As I had mentioned before, we follow EPA Superfund guidance very closely for our risk assessments, evaluating both human health and ecological receptors, and also we look for impact to the environment. In other words, we don't want to, damage, for example, groundwater resources. And so we'll also evaluate whether or not contamination that might be present, has a potential to impact groundwater in the future. And again, the goal of Superfund in general in our program here is really to reduce any risks that we have to a safe level for both current receptors, and in our case, because we're in a facility, we look typically at the current industrial worker. So those workers that are currently out at the site, they're our current receptors, and potential future receptors, which, might be, a future resident should we ever, get rid of some of the properties that they don't need anymore. And obviously ecological receptors that are currently in would be there. So this is just kind of a schematic of kind of our process. They're called, it's basically a conceptual site model. It kind of goes through laying things out in terms of looking at who our receptors might be and what media might be affected. So in this particular case, we have our contaminated area. And so you're basically looking at potential direct exposure to people there. You might have emission from either dust or vapor that might travel that you'd have to look at. Then you have the potential leaching and or movement of contamination from the source into groundwater, where that might discharge into a stream or be taken up by, say, a groundwater well, that might ultimately impact people who who are living in a residence that might be using that water. And so, so in our risk assessment process, you develop this conceptual site model to look at, who the receptors are, what they're exposed to, and what pathways exist. So again, we talk a lot about these thresholds for whether or not we need to take any type of action. You just heard for the IOU program that for early actions, in other words, for getting out and doing something for a more kind of higher level risk, we were talking about a 1 in 10,000 threshold. Well, overall, if you look at a final risk determination, you're looking at a 1 in a million as essentially our threshold for action versus no action of some sort. And and besides the cancer risk, we also look at potential toxic effects from chemicals that might not be carcinogenic. And mercury is a good example. Mercury has toxic risks associated with it, not necessarily just cancer risk. Ecological risks, again, look at receptors and a couple of different ways. A very, very conservative screen, which would be no observed effects levels, and then what would be considered the lowest observed effect level. And then we'll tend to do these site-specific studies if we think we have any potential risk based on modeling. So again, we talked a little bit about that trophic modeling. And so when you actually get done with your paper studies and you say, well, there's a possibility we might have some risk, it's always best to go out into the field and actually determine whether you see any real impacts, because there's a lot of conservatism that gets kind of built into these paper models and studies that we do. And so we always want to try to follow up and make sure that, we may actually see some impact before we would take an action. The environmental risks, again, which are important. In other words, do we have groundwater or surface water that might be above our maximum contaminant levels for safe drinking, or potentially impact ecological receptors. So you might have fish in a stream, and they might be very sensitive to certain constituents, whereas humans wouldn't be. And that, for example, metals. Copper, for example, is very bad for fish. It's not as bad for people. And so, and then again, the soil residuals. If we have contamination in soil, we want to make sure that it doesn't get leached with rainfall into groundwater or surface water resources over time. So we basically, before we actually get then into looking at alternatives, we basically establish what we call these remedial action objectives. And so basically it kind of is just an extension of this conceptual site model that we developed. And the whole purpose is really preventing exposure, first of all, again, of who or what. In other words, what have we determined is at risk? Is it a future resident? Then that would be the who or what. To a specific contaminant, we try to be very specific, so it's not just contamination in general, but it might be to, for example, cesium-137, which is a radionuclide that we might find in our environment at SRS. And so, what media is that present in? Is it in soil? Do we find it in air or groundwater or surface water? So again, we're trying to be specific and at what levels, in other words, above a threshold. So there may be a threshold level that's not a problem. We're concerned about that contaminant if it's present above that threshold level. So ultimately, we're trying to clean up to that level X, whatever that safe level is. So our feasibility study, once we've kind of determined what our remedial action objectives are, so we have this problem, now we need to figure out how we're going to fix it and how we're going to clean things up. And so what we try to do starting out is looking at potential technologies that might be suitable or methods to prevent exposure to that contamination or to actually reduce and eliminate that contamination. And so we kind of have four categories here that I'll speak to a little bit that we kind of look at. And kind of first category of looking at things is our land use controls. And so we may have some contaminants ultimately that we would be leaving in place that we wouldn't be able to clean up, or that we are at levels that we don't think are very high, don't pose a very high risk. And so land use controls may be a viable alternative to look at preventing exposure to those contaminants. Those might include fencing, warning signs, and or even administrative control. So for example, in conducting work on site, all the workers have to go through what we call a site use site clearance process. So they can't actually do work out in the field until they have approval from any other organizations on site that might have something to do with that piece of, I'll call it a piece of land, okay? So in our organization, Area Completion Projects, we own essentially like waste sites. So anytime another organization on site wants to do any work in an area where there's a waste site, they have to come through us to determine whether or not it's safe to work there. So that's kind of this administrative process or control that we have in order to prevent exposure to a current worker. So engineering controls, those are pretty much trying to prevent exposure through some type of containment. And so say we have, you know, waste that might be buried in a pit, we might put a cover system and maybe put put concrete or asphalt on top of that. That would make it much more difficult to get to, you know, that contaminated material that's down below the surface of the ground. And then we look at treatment technologies as part of the process that are used to, you know, make things less toxic, actually reduce their concentrations, you know, or make them less mobile. And so there's a whole slew, depending on what type of contaminant that we're looking for, we try to pick a treatment technology that's appropriate for that contaminant. So for example, VOCs, or organic contaminants, TCE and PC are very common contaminants for groundwater at our site. So we look at a suite of technologies that can be used to reduce or eliminate volatile organic contaminants, TCE and PCE. So bioremediation, for example, is pretty effective for that. For metals, if you have a metals problem, you might not be able to bioremediate. So you might have to do something like a treatment in place with some type of stabilization, or, you know, to chemically fixate those metals. So we'll try to target, or not maybe target, but tailor our treatment technology to the contaminant that we're looking at. And then removal is kind of the fourth category. And so that would be, okay, you know, we've got a problem and it's bad, maybe we just want to dig it all up and take it away someplace that's safe, you know, so we'll take it to an engineered structure someplace else. And so there are, you know, facilities in the DOE complex that have been engineered to actually put, you know, for example, low-level waste, or there's facilities for hazardous waste that have been designed to safely contain those and manage those. So one of the other things we do as part of the feasibility study is look at what other applicable laws there might be to our problem. And so, for example, for PCBs, the Toxic Substances Control Act is an entire regulation that tells us how we should deal with PCBs. And so rather than reinvent the wheel and make stuff up, we can go to that and say, okay, it tells us that we need to clean up PCBs to this level. So we'll use that. Maximum contaminant levels for groundwater, for drinking water, okay? That's the Safe Water Drinking Act. And so we basically use those levels as cleanup standards for groundwater, because the Safe Water Drinking Act has already basically said, okay, if you're below this level, the water is safe to drink. So that's good for us, so we can use that standard to help us clean up. And then some of those might apply to different activities. So for example, if we're doing soil remediation and we're doing a vapor removal, we need to have an air permit to make sure that we're not releasing things into the atmosphere that are not, you know, not allowed under air permitting. And so we'll look at other requirements and laws that we have to help guide our cleanup process. And then once we kind of put together these different types of alternatives, we'll basically screen those using kind of three main criteria: effectiveness of that technology or alternative, implementability, in other words, how easy it is to actually implement it in the field, and then, you know, how much does it cost. So if I have two alternatives early on that I think have equal effectiveness and they're both easy to implement, well, if one costs $5 million more than another, I'm not going to bother carrying that more expensive alternative through to a detailed analysis, because, you know, it's not a a good use of our time to try to go through and analyze something in detail if I know I'm not going to want to spend $5 million more for something that's going to give me the same level of effectiveness. So when we get into the actual detailed evaluation of the alternatives, the Superfund program has kind of laid out these 9 criteria that we go through to evaluate alternatives. And so there's threshold criteria, and those 2 are basically all the alternatives have to meet those, right? You got to be overall, we have to be protective of human health and the environment. We have to comply with other laws. And then we have what we call the primary balancing criteria, which are used to kind of compare the different alternatives and really evaluate which ones are better than the other ones. And those have those subcategories. And 3 of those we already kind of used in the screening process, effectiveness, implementability, and cost. But we look also at long-term and short-term effectiveness. And the difference being long-term is really how well do we think it's going to perform in the long haul. So if I'm going to do some type of remedy for contamination that's going to potentially be around for a long time, I want to make sure that 30 years from now, that remedy is going to be effective. The short-term effectiveness is really more of, okay, how quickly can I get out and implement this so that I can reduce the short-term risk that may be there to the environment or to people on site if they're working there, and or does that remedy that I'm implementing have any short-term risks associated with it. So sometimes we look at that also. So we don't necessarily want to put the workers who are doing the cleanup in a situation where they may be at risk or have a high potential to get injured as compared to another alternative. You don't want to, have the solution be worse than the problem. And so that's, another criteria that we look at. And then of course, we also consider, cost as part of that. The last 2 criteria, modifying criteria, are state acceptance. Now, because we're working at a federal facility, we're working very closely with both EPA and with South Carolina DHEC. So generally, we don't get to the point where we're going to propose something and the state's going to say, no, we don't agree with what you're doing, because we've kind of been working with them all along. So that's kind of a given here. But then the community acceptance is also important, and that's what's part of our, public review process when we go out with our proposed plans, to make sure that we take all questions and recommendations from the public and consider those as part of our decision-making process. So just to kind of give you an example of kind of what we might do, and this is somewhat simplistic, but we'll put together like a comparative analysis table. And it'll be generally a lot more detailed in the documentation that we prepared, but this is kind of a summary form. This is kind of what you might even see in a proposed plan that we would give to the public to say, okay, how do we summarize this analysis of different alternatives? And so what we'd have here is kind of, we listed these balancing criteria that we talked about on the top, and basically we came up with, say, 4 different alternatives. One of the things I didn't mention we always have to do is that we always have to evaluate no action. I know that kind of sounds funny, because it's like, well, if you got a problem, why would you do nothing about it? But it's just a requirement, basically under the NCP, under the laws that we work under, that we have that as our kind of baseline. So you have to compare no action against all the other alternatives that you're actually looking at. So in this case, we just have like 3 different types of alternatives. One which would be, basically a dig it up and get rid of it. The other which would be, let's grout it in place and cap it. And then the third would be, we're just going to use land use controls to prevent exposure to it and say, look at groundwater in the future to see if there's an impact. And so the problem in this case is we had a waste site with cesium-137 and strontium-90 contamination. Okay, and both of those radionuclides pose some risk to human health if you're exposed to them. But with strontium-90, it also tends to be a little bit mobile in the environment. And so over time, our groundwater modeling showed that we might see it in groundwater. It wasn't in groundwater currently, but in the future, it might get there. Okay, so in looking at these types of alternatives, you'd say, okay, if I just do land use controls and groundwater monitoring, I'm not really trying to do anything to address that strontium-90 problem that might get to groundwater in the future. So when you look at like a long-term effectiveness rating, okay, so on a scale of 1 to 5, we gave it a 2. A little bit better than doing nothing, because at least we're monitoring groundwater, because it's not there right now, okay, but it might be in the future. And so in comparison to the other alternatives where we're actually trying to do some treatment or prevent infiltration, so the things don't get to groundwater, or if you completely dig up the problem, obviously those are much better in terms of the long-term effectiveness as compared to not doing anything. And so then we have, reducing toxicity, mobility, or volume through treatment. And again, what's interesting about this one is you may say, well, why would this be a 1? Because I'm digging up the whole thing and I'm getting rid of it, okay? But you're actually not treating it at all. You're just mechanically removing it and taking it somewhere else. Okay, then I'm going to bury it someplace else, and I'm going to make sure that it's safe where it's buried. But I actually haven't treated the contamination at all to try to reduce that toxicity, mobility, or volume. And so that's one of the things under Superfund that is emphasized, that we try to look at a treatment technology that actually does that. And so actually just an excavation and moving it away from our site, taking it someplace else, scores lowly, doesn't score at all, basically. And so this route and cap option actually is the best in terms of that particular criteria, because in grouting the material, you're actually trying to chemically bind it. You're trying to keep it in place so it doesn't leach when rainwater falls on it. So that's the idea behind that specific alternative. So then short-term effectiveness, these are pretty similar. This is pretty easy to implement. And so, it gets a higher score because you can go out and do it really quickly. Same thing with implementability. And then, you have your cost criteria here. So obviously doing, without doing any type of treatment or excavation, that's the lowest cost alternative. But if you get back to what our problem was, it's really not helping our problem with potential future impact to groundwater. So in this case, we ended up with a grout and cap solution. And so because it was especially meeting kind of that circular criteria of doing something about the problem, and it actually ended up being less than actually digging it all underway. So just to kind of go through one of the things that we kind of like to do with some of our alternatives is do kind of what we call like almost a cost benefit analysis. And so I kind of just put together a simple table to compare. For example, what we're going to do here is we've got a groundwater alternative. So we've got groundwater contamination, and we're trying to clean that contamination up, and we're ultimately trying to get to maximum contaminant levels, right? Which is our requirement under the Safe Drinking Water Act. So to get to that, it's going to take a certain amount of time to do that. And so what we've compared here is the time to get to that MCL or safe level of drinking water. Essentially, you can drink the water if it's down to that level, and then compared to basically the cost to do that. And so we had a couple of different alternatives that we looked at to try to address the groundwater problem. And so monitored natural attenuation, some of you may have heard that term, but basically it's looking at natural processes that exist in our groundwater system that over time can reduce the level of contamination, just essentially naturally. And so, especially with a good example is tritium. Okay, tritium is a radionuclide contaminant, but it has a half-life of about 12.3 years. So every 12.3 years, half of it goes away. It just disappears. So essentially, over basically 3 half-lives or 40 years, you lose about 90% of your tritium in groundwater. So that's a natural attenuation process because it physically, basically, radioactively decays over time. So, and now in this particular case, I think we're looking at PCE or TCE in groundwater because these treatment technologies are specific for that. So we had a a recirculation well, which basically injects air into the aquifer and helps to kind of strip the organic material out of the water. This TRB was a permeable reactive barrier, so basically the groundwater flows through this like a gate and a funnel system. And so it kind of forces the groundwater through this gate, and then in that gate essentially is a material that basically completely destroys the TCE and the PCE. And then the last option, which is phyto, is basically once the groundwater's traveled the distance, ultimately it's got to come up to the surface. Well, it comes up to the surface near, say, a surface water stream. Well, you can plant a whole bunch of trees, for example, very close to that surface water stream, and use those trees to help to phytoremediate or pull up the contamination out of the water and essentially evaporate it. And so, but if you look again carefully at the cost for those and then compare that to the relative time that it takes to get to our cleanup standard, so like this, so this alternative, when we made that comparison, well, one, its cost is the highest, and two, it's taken longer to get to our target level than these two technologies. So obviously this is a pretty easy one to say, okay, you know, phyto is not a good option for this particular problem, because not only does it cost more, it's going to take longer to get to our cleanup standard. So, but these three, right, it gets to be a little bit harder to figure that out, because each one sequentially costs a little bit more. Each one reduces the time that it takes to get to our cleanup standard. So that is always a bit of a struggle, because you're trying to figure out, do I want to spend the extra money to reduce my time to get to my drinking water standards? And so one of the things that we like to consider here at least is, you know, what type of control do we have in place as a DOE facility? And so is it likely that we're going to be able to have institutional controls over the groundwater if it's not moving to surface water or not moving off-site? So if I can say, well, it's pretty reasonable to assume for the next 50 to 100 years, DOE is going to own, you know, SRS. Is it reasonable to assume that I can then wait 60 years for natural attenuation to reach my groundwater cleanup standards, as opposed to spending more money to maybe do a more active treatment? And so those would be one of the considerations, you know, when we're trying to come to a decision with EPA and DHEC, is, you know, what's that time frame really to get to our cleanup standard, and is that time frame reasonable enough to maybe select a lower cost alternative or not? So the proposed plan that we put together basically presents whatever preferred alternative we end up selecting, and again, they're supposed to be written in a way that basically it's understandable for the general public to see what we're doing, to understand what it is we want to do. And I know that, you know, we as technocrats have a tendency to make things a little bit complicated sometimes. And so we're always trying to work to try to improve the readability of those documents. And we know you guys have made comments before specifically about some of our proposed plans being pretty complicated. So we do understand that that's something we need to get a little bit better with. There's always a minimum of about 30 days to get to public comment. And then, like I said before, if there's interest, we'll have a public meeting to actually present the information and then receive, you know, comments and address those. Then once we've received public input and we've addressed public comment, we go through and we basically document everything in that final remedy selection. And I talked a little bit about that before, and again, the preferred alternative that we've proposed in the proposed plan can be modified to get from either DHEC and or the public. It's documented in that record of decision, and again, it basically describes in detail how the remedy that we've proposed meets kind of the legal requirements that we have under CERCLA, which is our the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. So there's a mouthful, but so we refer to it always as CERCLA. And then ultimately, the three parties sign the document, and those are the three parties that are in our SRS Federal Facility Agreement. DOE as lead, and then EPA and DHEC. So I just wanted to kind of walk through a couple of actual remedies that we've done on the site, just to give you a flavor of the types of things that we do. And so there's and some of these are P areas specifically, and so they were projects that I was involved in. So I was kind of familiar with what went on there. And so we had a problem where we had PCE and TCE in the soil. It was at depth, and we were concerned about it impacting groundwater. And so as a result, we looked at doing oxidation and soil vapor extraction as a remedy. And so we had considered other alternatives, including just covering it, just doing soil vapor extraction, where you basically extract the vapors out of the ground, and then doing some type of in situ bioremediation, where you actually put in microbes and they basically break down the contamination. The oxidation and SVE approach we determined was the most effective. And this just shows basically the first step of that. We had to the ground was fairly low permeability, fairly dense, so it was hard to kind of get in contact with the contamination. So we injected basically a material to kind of open up fractures in the subsurface, and basically put in what's called a proppant or a sand and mixture that basically opens up pathways for the chemical that we basically oxidize the contamination with in the future. So this was basically a picture of the injection where we injected the oxidant. This was the actual oxidant mixture that we put in. It was sodium persulfate, which is a type of oxidant that leaves very little in the way of future byproducts. They completely basically get broken down in the subsurface. And so, but they're very effective at actually breaking down the contamination that you have present. And then the final step of that was actually a soil vapor extraction system that was solar powered. Those are some solar powered or solar panels there. And this project worked very, very well, actually. We were about 2 years from actual up in the field to the time that we met the remedial action objective goals that we had in the soil. And so and we had the benefit, we had some groundwater contamination below that area, and there was actually some cleanup in the groundwater beneath the area that we had specifically targeted with the oxidant. So that was one of our successes with respect to doing Vadosome treatment. The P ash basin cover project. Basically, we had a large area of over 30 acres with ash that was deposited. Each of the area reactors had a coal-fired power plant, and so once they burned their coal, they basically had ash residue. Those ash residues were basically put out into these big basins. In addition, at this location, there was some process piping that fed into an area that was adjacent to that basin. Those process pipes discharged cesium-137 also into that area. So we had kind of a combination of ash and cesium-137 here and just ash in this area. So we looked at basically a couple of different alternatives there. We were looking at land use controls only to prevent contact with the contamination. Basically soil cover for the entire system with removal of the cesium-137 down to relatively low levels in this portion of the site, and then a complete removal and disposal of everything. And so we had a pretty broad range of costs, anywhere from $1 million to $30 million, depending on what alternatives we looked at. We basically landed in the middle. And so we basically put a soil cover on this whole area and removed some of the cesium-137 here. That job was completed for about, I'm gonna say about $9 million, and that was done under ERA, the Recovery Act work that was done back in 2012. And so that is a picture basically, again, of the same area after the remediation was complete. And so now it's kind of a big grassy field. So, and P reactor area is over here. And so the other area that I was actually talking about with the soil cleanup was back on the back side of that reactor where there was some TC contamination. So the last example I'll touch on here real quick is the actual reactor itself. And so this is basically kind of a schematic of the reactor and the actual remedy that was selected. And so basically what we did was we took the underground portion of the reactor and basically filled this entire area with grout because we had radionuclide contamination in the subsurface. The disassembly basin area, there was actually a fair amount of contaminated concrete above ground. So we actually decided to remove that to grade and then cover that area with a concrete cap. The reactor vessel remained in place but was grouted and then also covered with a really thick concrete cover. And then some of the roof areas on the reactor building were basically improved with concrete and then stacked with cement. And so we had again looked at other alternatives as part of this process. It also included basically kind of raising the entire facility to ground level. And basically leaving just the subsurface in place, grouted. And then we also had a complete removal disposal, which was taking everything away. And that was very, very expensive and also would have resulted in probably some pretty high risks of exposure to the residual radioactive contamination in the reactor vessel. So we decided to basically close this and our reactor also in place, using the grout, the heavy duty concrete cover and basically leaving this building in place with reinforced roofs. So. This is an embedded video on the stack right there.
Yeah, sorry, we don't have quick time. I didn't have the jet video, so.
Okay.
I didn't know the jet video, so I'm not.
Not run it?
Yeah, I'm not prepared.
Okay.
Did we just get an email? Did we just, like on YouTube?
Actually, yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'll have to check that.
It was a quick time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just a 10-second clip of the actual stack coming down. Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, and this was basically the area inside the reactor where they were above the actual reactor vessel when they were bringing grout into the area and filling that up. And that's basically an aerial photograph now of what it looks like. And so you can kind of see the improved roofs areas that are the wire concrete. And then this is actually the footprint of the disassembly basin, which was completely taken down and replaced with concrete cover. That's kind of it. I'll leave you with this nighttime shot of P reactor. Actually was taken time lapse, and so it was actually kind of nice. Nothing out there except for coyotes and some monitoring wells. Okay, so that's it. But you guys have any questions?
Any questions? Very good presentation, Jeff. Thank you very much.
All right.
Any committee members have anything they want to discuss? Okay, nothing. Then how about public comment? Anybody from the public want to speak? Everybody's tired, ready to go home. If nobody from the public, then we stand adjourned. Thank y'all very much for coming.
I'm tired and exhausted.